343, Chapter 18 and 19.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion.
Episode 343, Spelunking. Well, hello. I am recording in a cave, a wet cave. I tried to record earlier this week, and the rain was so loud. The rain that brought tornadoes everywhere, the rain was so loud. And because we have moved everything out of here, the sound was so echoey. It truly sounded like I was stuck deep inside a cave somewhere with, dripping water going plonk, plonk against the window. So I am now in my closet, surrounded by egg carton foam, that egg crate foam that some people sleep on. And the closet door is protected by a large piece of terry cloth that Nanette, the nanny, gave to me. So I am in a cave and it's wet outside. So here I am spelunking my way to you. Well, as I mentioned, the move has been kicking my butt, but the move is partly over. There are 3 stages to this move. The first and largest and potentially most fraught is done. And that was moving all of the furniture. I mean, all of the furniture up to Pennsylvania. And that all happened. And everything got in the house. And there were only a few minor disasters. And then the boys and I came back here, and I changed our Wi-Fi network name to This is Sparta, because this is Spartan living like I never even did. I mean, we don't even have cinder block bookshelves. That's how Spartan it is right now. So the boys and I are here. I'm sleeping on a camping pallet. It's not even an air mattress. It's just one of those little cushy things that you sleep on when you're camping in a sleeping bag. And the boys are on mattresses that we're going to throw out when we're done. They were dying mattresses, so it was kind of timely. And, we're eating on trays, and we're here until next week. When we move again, we'll move out of our current larger apartment and into a little 1-bedroom apartment. And I'm hoping it won't be quite so echoey, but I have a sneaking suspicion I will be podcasting from the closet there as well. So I don't know. I hope the sound quality is okay, because there's really not much more I can do. Well, let's get to our book, shall we? 2 chapters today. 2 chapters, partly because I probably won't be able to get to recording next week, but also 2 chapters because I think they kind of go well together, because 17 gave you the first view that we've gotten of what's going on with the unionizing that Higgins is participating in. And this week, in chapter 18, called Likes and Dislikes, we're going to get a chance, not right away, but we're going to get a chance to hear from Thornton on the topic. And then chapter 19 takes us back to Higgins again, eventually. These are kind of odd chapters because she doesn't split the chapter with a scene at all. I guess you can kind of tell that this was a serialized book in this respect. That she's not cutting where books of this period seem to usually cut. Certainly Dickens cuts on a more conventional line, especially with those of you who are listening to Bleak House. There's the Lincolnshire chapter, and then there's the Esther's narrative chapter. And the same thing obviously happened with Wilkie Collins and even Jane Austen, now that I'm thinking about it, and Lucy May Alcott. So it was all of a time. But these chapters are a little different because of that, and they felt a little different to me because of it. But before we get too far into likes and dislikes, I wanted to let you know that Melanie, who I have spoken with by mail before, I'd completely forgotten this. She's a librarian, and therefore one of my favorite people in the world. And she has access to the OED That's right. She can access the Oxford English Dictionary whenever she wants. And I am jealous. But I now have access to Melanie. And so Melanie emailed because she went and looked up the information on skinning a flint. She found out, well, I'll just read you what she said. She says, if I'm understanding it correctly, skinflint came from the phrase skin a flint. The idea being that the flint was hard and a miser would work hard enough or be sharp enough to get a skin off of it for profit. The earliest usage seems to be in 1656, but the noun didn't appear until 1699. So skinning a flint started in 1656, but a skin flint didn't show up until almost 1700. That's kind of cool. I love the OED. But later, there's one about a man skinning a flea for his hide. Somehow these two things got related. Somebody who would go to the extent that they would skin a flint or skin a flea for its hide and tallow. That one you can kind of understand the miser thing much more clearly on. Isn't that fun? I love the OED, and therefore I love Melanie. So, yay and thank you, because that stuff was fun. Oh, and the other thing was, I was incorrect. The Tales from the Alhambra was actually the correct title for that book at that time. The title was changed, and so Elizabeth Gaskell was correct, and she wasn't trying to make Thornton's sister look any more stupid than she already makes her look. So, my bad. And thank you. Melanie is not the only one who wrote in to tell me. So in chapter 18, Margaret comes home from seeing Bessie, and her father now knows that the doctor was there. And her father drives me nuts. I feel bad saying that because I'm sure that he is quite representative of a certain class of men at this time period who were loving, but largely uninvolved. Not just like an absent-minded professor. I mean, on that scale somewhere, but just that kind of, well, you know, this is what you do, you women, and I do other things. And I love you, and I care for you, and I take care of you, but I don't really get involved. And now he seems to be trying to figure out kind of how to get involved, how to insert himself in this, and how to parse what's really going on. It's like he's just started to notice that his wife never tells him anything about herself. Is this ringing bells for any of you? So we have some scenes with Margaret and her father that are sweet but frustrating for me. And Margaret has a comment about Aunt Shaw. This is her aunt that she stayed with in London, saying that she's going to send back some coral ornaments for her from Corfu. I think that's where they were post-wedding. And then saying that she's not sure that anyone in Milton would approve. And Margaret said, I think she's got all of her ideas about the dissenters from the Quakers. And you may recall from Little Women, there was the kind of simple, plain-spoken, plain dressing, but simple, kind, generous, gentle Quaker lifestyle. And so there are dissenters in the North. Now, Mr. Hale is one of them, people who are not with or not in step with the Church of England, but they weren't all Quakers, and they didn't all look like Quakers or dress like Quakers. So that is what Margaret is talking about at that point. I've been meaning to mention this before. There is talk often about Mr. Hale going out and speaking, that he tutors privately like he does with Mr. Thornton, but he also does speaking engagements, and he speaks at the local lyceum. And this is a term that we pretty much don't use at all in the United States. I think it's still in use quite a few other places on the planet. But the people who went on the CraftLit tour, second time I've brought it up today, the CraftLit tour in 2010, Diane had us go to St. Fagans in Wales. And this is a reconstructed Welsh village. Feels kind of strange to call it a village, but it is. And one of the things that they've done is they've taken buildings from all over the greater Welsh countryside, and they took them down and then built them back up on the grounds of St. Fagans. And one of these places was a workman's hall, which had meeting rooms and places where they could, sit and take tea and hang out with other working men. But they also had a meeting hall, a lyceum, that was a place where they could go in and listen to lectures and hear itinerant speakers, traveling speakers, and learn things. And I thought it was such an interesting thing because in the United States, I guess the closest you would get is the VFW halls, the Veterans of Foreign Wars. There are VFW halls all over the place, and the guys go and hang out there, and it's a place where they can network and relax because they are among their friends. And it seemed like this was the same kind of thing, but the emphasis on speaking engagements and getting to hear speakers reminded me of hearing about the Lincoln-Douglas debates that happened in the United States when Abraham Lincoln was running for president. There was a debate that went on so long that they all agreed to break for dinner. And they went home and they ate, and everybody came back to hear the continuation of the debate. I think it went on for upwards of 3 hours total. It may have gone on for far more than that. I don't remember. But that kind of going and listening to people speak, we kind of don't do that anymore here in the United States, especially not political debates, partially because there are no political debates anymore. They're just screaming matches. But when there were political debates, it's been a long time since we've done things like that. But listen to what Hale is giving talks on, because it's ridiculous and it's sweet. And I'm sure, the guys who go they're happy to just get to listen to somebody new. And I'm sure they applaud very kindly at the end, but you just imagine what their faces look like. So that's Mr. Hale. And then after this scene with Hale and Margaret, we switched to the Thorntons, to their drawing room that night. And John's there, and Fanny is there, and Mrs. Thornton is there. And we learn an awful lot about their prejudices, but also a lot about their gentility in a lot of ways. John is certainly a gentleman in many, many respects. But then towards the end, Thornton and his mother start to talk about business. And you'll even hear a reference to John wishing that she would call for the candles, but that he wasn't about to question her on this topic because it was her thriftiness that saved them all in the beginning and allowed him to become this rather wealthy businessman. So he defers to her in that respect, but then goes on to talk about the looming strike and what it means to all of them. And listen, with Higgins in mind from last week, listen to what Thornton says with a careful ear. Because there's one thing which we'll talk about at the end of today's episode that just drove me nuts about it. And I'm very curious to see if it drives you nuts as well. And then in chapter 19, called Angel Visits, we once again start with the Hales. We start with Margaret and Mrs. Hale, and Margaret's trying to keep Mrs. Hale in good spirits. And she even spins around in her dress, so her dress starts to look like a wheel of cheese. Those big round, straight-sided wheels. So they're having this really pleasant time. And then we switch again, but this time we switch back to Bessie and Higgins. And listen to Bessie. Elizabeth Gaskell does something really interesting in this chapter, and I really give her a huge high five because it's really hard to do. And she, I thought, pulled it off beautifully. There is a reference to one biblical story, which actually it will make more sense what she's saying when if you aren't familiar with the story, once you know this part. There's a story of Dives and Lazarus. This is in Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. This is do you remember the story of Lazarus the leper? And there's a dog who's licking his wounds, and he's sitting at the gate of a rich man's home when this is happening. And when they die, Lazarus is in heaven at Abraham's bosom, and the rich man is in hell. And he pleads with Lazarus, the rich man pleads with Lazarus, asking if he might dip his finger in water to cool Dives's tongue, to cool the rich man's tongue. And the rich man is told that the great gulf that now divides them cannot be crossed. So when Bessie talks about touching your fingertip to a tongue, that's what she's going after. There is a weird reference to a raven, and all you need to know is that Edgar Allan Poe's poem, The Raven, had been published and was very popular. The word exoteric means outsiders, and a squab, S-Q-U-A-B, is a name, it's a nickname, it's a slang term for a low seat or a low couch. So there's a lot for you to listen for in today's chapters, and I know there are 2 chapters, and I can tell you honestly, I've listened to these chapters quite a few times, and each time I catch something new. And I think part of that is because of that kind of bifurcated focus for each of these chapters that I suddenly realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm with Higgins now. Okay. And you kind of have to catch up. I think that's part of it. But I had an interesting email conversation with a listener this week about how there are some books that we find ourselves having an urge to go read even after we've listened to the chapter. And she was saying this kind of apologetically. And I wrote back and said, no, I have the same thing happen. But I think it happens to me most when we're reading books that have a lot of slang or dialect, because my brain is old. My brain really needs to see how the words are spelled to be sure that I'm understanding them correctly. And I think, especially if you are not a native English speaker, books like Mark Twain, anything by Mark Twain, but books like Jane Eyre or Wuthering Heights or this one, North and South, anytime you have a dialect where the words are spelled phonetically, if you can at least see how they're being apostrophed and spelled, you probably have a better idea of what's being said, regardless who the narrator is. I mean, right now we have a marvelous narrator for this book. There's a marvelous narrator over at Audible, and it just doesn't matter. I do find myself going back to my hard copy, and these may be those kind of chapters for you. So maybe these will last you for 2 weeks while I go move again. All right, let's listen to chapters 18 and 19 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 18. Likes and Dislikes. My heart revolts within me, and 2 voices make themselves audible within my bosom. Wallenstein. On Margaret's return home, she found 2 letters on the table. One was a note for her mother. The other, which had come by the post, was evidently from her Aunt Shaw, covered with foreign postmarks, thin, silvery, and rustling. She took up the other and was examining it when her father came in suddenly. "So, your mother is tired and gone to bed early. I'm afraid such a thundery day was not the best in the world for the doctor to see her. What did he say? Dixon tells me he spoke to you about her." Margaret hesitated. Her father's looks became more grave and anxious. "He does not think her seriously ill?" "Not at present. She needs care, he says. He was very kind, and said he would call again and see how his medicines worked." "Only care? He did not recommend change of air? He did not say this smoky town was doing her any harm, did he, Margaret?" "No, not a word," she replied gravely. "He was anxious, I think." "Doctors have that anxious manner. It's professional," said he. Margaret saw in her father's nervous ways that the first impression of possible danger was made upon his mind in spite of all his making light of what she told him. He could not forget the subject, could not pass from it to other things. He kept recurring to it through the evening, with an unwillingness to receive even the slightest unfavorable idea, which made Margaret inexpressibly sad. "This letter is from Aunt Shaw, Papa. She has got to Naples and finds it too hot, so she has taken apartments at Sorrento. But I don't think she likes Italy." "He did not say anything about diet, did he?" "It was to be nourishing and digestible. Mamma's appetite is pretty good, I think." "Yes, and that makes it all the more strange he should have thought of speaking about diet." "I asked him, Papa." Another pause. Then Margaret went on. "Aunt Shaw says she has sent me some coral ornaments, Papa, but added Margaret, half smiling. She's afraid the Milton dissenters won't appreciate them. She has got all her ideas of dissenters from the Quakers, has she not? If ever you hear or notice that your mother wishes for anything, be sure you let me know. I am so afraid she does not tell me always what she would like. Pray, see after that girl Mrs. Thornton named. If we had a good, efficient house servant, Dixon could be constantly with her, and I'd answer for it we'd soon set her up amongst us if care will do it. She's been very much tired of late with the hot weather and the difficulty of getting a servant. A little rest will put her quite to rights, eh, Margaret?
I hope so, said Margaret, but so sadly that her father took notice of it. He pinched her cheek.
Come, if you look so pale as this, I must rouge you up a little. Take care of yourself, child, or you'll be wanting the doctor next.
But he could not settle to anything that evening. He was continually going backwards and forwards on laborious tiptoe to see if his wife was still asleep. Margaret's heart ached at his restlessness, his trying to stifle and strangle the hideous fear that was looming out of the dark places of his heart. He came back at last, somewhat comforted.
She's awake now, Margaret. She quite smiled as she saw me standing by her, just her old smile, and she says she feels refreshed and ready for tea. Where's the note for her? She wants to see it. I'll read it to her while you make tea.
The note proved to be a formal invitation from Mrs. Thornton to Mr., Mrs. and Miss Hale to dinner on the 21st instant. Margaret was surprised to find an acceptance contemplated after all she had learnt of sad probabilities during the day. But so it was. The idea of her husband's and daughters going to this dinner had quite captivated Mrs. Hale's fancy even before Margaret had heard the contents of the note. It was an event to diversify the monotony of the invalid's life, and she clung to the idea of their going with even fretful pertinacity when Margaret objected.
Nay, Margaret, if she wishes it, I'm sure we'll both go willingly. She never would wish it unless she felt herself really stronger, really better than we thought she was, eh, Margaret?
Said Mr. Hale anxiously, as she prepared to write the note of acceptance the next day.
Eh, Margaret?
Questioned he, with a nervous motion of his hands. It seemed cruel to refuse him the comfort he craved for, and besides, his passionate refusal to admit the existence of fear almost inspired Margaret herself with hope. "I do think she is better since last night," said she. "Her eyes look brighter and her complexion clearer."
"God bless you," said her father earnestly. "But is it true? Yesterday was so sultry everyone felt ill. It was a most unlucky day for Mr. Donaldson to see her on."
So he went away to his day's duties, now increased by the preparation of some lectures he had promised to deliver to the working people at a neighboring lyceum. He had chosen ecclesiastical architecture as his subject, rather more in accordance with his own taste and knowledge than as falling in with the character of the place or the desire for particular kinds of information among those to whom he was to lecture. And the institution itself, being in debt, was only too glad to get a gratis course from an educated and accomplished man like Mr. Hale, let the subject be what it might.
"Well, mother," asked Mr. Thornton that night, "who have accepted your invitations for the 21st?
"Fanny, where are the notes? The Slicksons accept. Collingbrooks accept. Stevenses accept. Browns decline. Ailes, father and daughter come. Mother too great an invalid. Macphersons come, and Mr. Horsefall and Mr. Young. I was thinking of asking the Porters, as the Browns can't come."
"Very good. Do you know, I'm really afraid Mrs. Hale is very far from well, from what Dr. Donaldson says."
It's strange of him to accept a dinner invitation if she is very ill, said Fanny.
I didn't say very ill, said her brother rather sharply. I only said very far from well. They may not know it either.
And then he suddenly remembered that, from what Dr. Donaldson had told him, Margaret, at any rate, must be aware of the exact state of the case.
Very probably they are quite aware of what you said yesterday, John, of the great advantage it would be to them, to Mr. Hale, I mean, to be introduced to such people as the Stevenses and the Collingbrooks.
I'm sure that motive would not influence them. No, I think I understand how it is.
John,
said Fanny, laughing in her little, weak, nervous way.
How you profess to understand these Hales, and how you never will allow that we can know anything about them. Are they really so very different to most people one meets with?
She did not mean to vex him, but if she had intended it, she could not have done it more thoroughly. He chafed in silence, however, not deigning to reply to her question.
They do not seem to me out of the common way, said Mrs. Thornton. He appears a worthy kind of man enough, rather too simple for trade, so it's perhaps as well he should have been a clergyman first, and now a teacher. She's a bit of a fine lady with her invalidism, and as for the girl, she's the only one who puzzles me when I think about her, which I don't often do. She seems to have a great notion of giving herself airs, and I can't make out why. I could almost fancy she thinks herself too good for her company at times, and yet they're not rich from all I can hear. They never have been.
And she's not accomplished, Mamma. She can't play.
Go on, Fanny. What else does she want to bring her up to your standard?
Nay, John, said his mother. That speech of Fanny's did no harm. I myself heard Miss Hale say she could not play. If you would let us alone, we could perhaps like her and see her merits.
I'm sure I never could,
murmured Fanny, protected by her mother. Mr. Thornton heard, but did not care to reply. He was walking up and down the dining room, wishing that his mother would order candles and allow him to set to work at either reading or writing, and so put a stop to the conversation. But he never thought of interfering in any of the small domestic regulations that Mrs. Thornton observed in habitual remembrance of her old economies.
Mother,
said he, stopping, and bravely speaking out the truth,
I wish you would like Miss Hale.
Why? Asked she, startled by his earnest yet tender manner.
You're never thinking of marrying her, a girl without a penny? She would never have me,
said he with a short laugh.
No, I don't think she would,
answered his mother. She laughed in my face when I praised her for speaking out something Mr. Bell had said in your favour. I liked the girl for doing it so frankly, for it made me sure she had no thought of you, and the next minute she vexed me so by seeming to think, well, never mind, only you're right in saying she's too good an opinion of herself to think of you. The saucy jade. I should like to know where she'd find a better. If these words hurt her son, the dusky light prevented him from betraying any emotion. In a minute he came up quite cheerfully to his mother, and putting one hand lightly on her shoulder, said,
Well, as I'm just as much convinced of the truth of what you have been saying as you can be, and as I have no thought or expectation of ever asking her to be my wife, you'll believe me for the future that I'm quite disinterested in speaking about her. I foresee trouble for that girl, perhaps want of motherly care, and I only wish you to be ready to be a friend to her in case she needs one. Now, Fanny, said he, I trust you have delicacy enough to understand that it is as great an injury to Miss Hale as to me. In fact, she would think it a greater, to suppose that I have any reason, more than I now give, for begging you and my mother to show her every kindly attention. I cannot forgive her pride,
said his mother. "I will befriend her, if there is need for your asking, John. I would befriend Jezebel herself if you asked me. But this girl, who turns up her nose at us all, who turns up her nose at you—" "Nay, mother, I've never yet put myself, and I mean never to put myself within reach of her contempt." "Contempt, indeed." One of Mrs. Thornton's expressive snorts. "Don't go on speaking of Miss Hale, John, if I've to be kind to her. When I'm with her, I don't know if I like or dislike her most, but when I think of her and hear you talk of her, I hate her. I can see she's given herself airs to you as well as if you'd told me out." "And if she has," said he, and then he paused for a moment, then went on, "I'm not a lad to be cowed by a proud look from a woman, or to care for her misunderstanding me and my position. I can laugh at it." "To be sure, and at her too, with her fine notions and haughty tosses." "I only wonder why you talk so much about her then," said Fanny. "I'm sure I'm tired enough of the subject." "Well," said her brother with a shade of bitterness, "suppose we find some more agreeable subject. What do you say to a strike, by way of something pleasant to talk about?" "Have the hands actually turned out?" asked Mrs. Thornton with vivid interest. "Appa's men are actually out. Mine are working out their week. Through fear of being prosecuted for breach of contract, I'd have had every one of 'em up and punished for it that left his work before his time was out." "The law expenses would have been more than the hands themselves were worth, a set of ungrateful naughts," said his mother. "To be sure, but I'd have shown them how I keep my word, and how I mean them to keep theirs. They know me by this time. Slickson's men are off. Pretty certain he won't spend money in getting them punished. We're in for a turnout, mother." "I hope there are not many orders in hand." "Of course there are. They know that well enough. But they don't quite understand all, though they think they do." "What do you mean, John?" Candles had been brought, and Fanny had taken up her interminable piece of worsted work, over which she was yawning, throwing herself back in her chair from time to time to gaze at vacantly and think of nothing at her ease. "Why," said he, "the Americans are getting their yarns so into the general market that our only chance is producing them at a lower rate. If we can't, we may shut up shop at once, and hands and masters go alike on tramp. Yet these fools go back to the prices paid 3 years ago. Nay, some of their leaders quote Dickinson's prices now, though they know as well as we do that, what with fines pressed out of their wages as no honourable man would extort them, and other ways which I for one would scorn to use, the real rate of wage paid at Dickinson's is less than at ours. Upon my word, mother, I wish the old combination laws were in force. It is too bad to find out that fools, ignorant, wayward men like these, just by uniting their weak, silly heads, are to rule over the fortunes of those who bring all the wisdom that knowledge and experience, and often painful thought and anxiety can give. The next thing will be, indeed, but come to it now, that we shall have to go and stand at an hand, and humbly ask the Secretary of the Spinners' Union to be so kind as to furnish us with labour at their own price. That's what they want, they who haven't the sense to see that if we don't get a fair share of the profits to compensate us for our wear and tear here in England, we can move off to some other country, and that, what with home and foreign competition, we are none of us likely to make above a fair share, and may be thankful enough if we can get that in an average number of years. Can't you get hands from Ireland? I wouldn't keep these fellows a day. I'd teach 'em that I was master and could employ what servants I liked." "Yes, to be sure I can,
and I will, too, if they go on long. It will be trouble and expense, and I fear there will be some danger, but I will do it rather than give in. If there is to be all this extra expense, I'm sorry we're giving a dinner just now. So am I, not because of the expense, but because I shall have much to think about and many unexpected calls on my time. But we must have had Mr. Arsfall, and he does not stay in Milton long. And as for the others, we owe them dinners, and it's all one trouble.
He kept on with his restless walk, not speaking any more, but drawing a deep breath from time to time, as if endeavouring to throw off some annoying thought. Fanny asked her mother numerous small questions, all having nothing to do with the subject which a wiser person would have perceived was occupying her attention. Consequently, she received many short answers. She was not sorry when, at 10 o'clock, the servants filed in to prayers. These her mother always read, first reading a chapter. They were now working steadily through the Old Testament. When prayers were ended, and his mother had wished him good night with that long, steady look of hers which conveyed no expression of the tenderness that was in her heart, but yet had the intensity of a blessing, Mr. Thornton continued his walk. All his business plans had received a check, a sudden pull-up from this approaching turnout. The forethought of many anxious hours was thrown away, utterly wasted by their insane folly, which would injure themselves even more than him, though no one could set any limit to the mischief they were doing. And these were the men who thought themselves fitted to direct the masters in the disposal of their capital. Hamper had said only this very day that if he were ruined by the strike, he would start life again, comforted by the conviction that those who brought it on were in a worse predicament than he himself, for he had head as well as hands, while they had only hands, and if they drove away their market, they could not follow it nor turn to anything else. But this thought was no consolation to Mr. Thornton. It might be that revenge gave him no pleasure. It might be that he valued the position he had earned with the sweat of his brow so much that he keenly felt its being endangered by the ignorance or folly of others, so keenly that he had no thoughts to spare for what would be the consequences of their conduct to themselves. He paced up and down, setting his teeth a little now and then. At last it struck 2. The candles were flickering in their sockets. He lighted his own, muttering to himself, "Once for all, they shall know whom they have got to deal with. I can give them a fortnight, no more. If they don't see their madness before the end of that time, I must have hands from Ireland. I believe it's Slickson's doing, confound him and his dodges. He thought he was overstocked, so he seemed to yield at first when the deputation came to him, and of course he only confirmed them in their folly, as he meant to do. That's where it spread from." Chapter 19. Angel Visits. As angels in some brighter dreams call to the soul when man doth sleep, so some strange thoughts transcend our wonted themes, and into glory peep. Henry Vaughan. Mrs. Hale was curiously amused and interested by the idea of the Thornton dinner party. She kept wondering about the details, with something of the simplicity of a little child who wants to have all its anticipated pleasures described beforehand. But the monotonous life led by invalids often makes them like children, inasmuch as they have neither of them any sense of proportion in events, and seem each to believe that the walls and curtains which shut in their world and shut out everything else must of necessity be larger than anything hidden beyond. Besides, Mrs. Hale had had her vanities as a girl, had perhaps unduly felt their mortification when she became a poor clergyman's wife.
They had been smothered and kept down, but they were not extinct. And she liked to think of seeing Margaret dressed for a party, and discussed what she should wear with an unsettled anxiety that amused Margaret, who had been more accustomed to society in her one in Harley Street than her mother in 25 years of Helstone. "Then you think you shall wear your white silk? Are you sure it will fit? It's nearly a year since Edith was married." "Oh, yes, Mamma. Mrs. Murray made it, and it's sure to be right. It may be a straw's breadth shorter or longer waisted according to my having grown fat or thin, but I don't think I've altered in the least." "Hadn't you better let Dixon see it? It may have gone yellow with lying by." "If you like, Mamma. But if the worst comes to the worst, I have a very nice pink gauze which Aunt Shaw gave me only 2 or 3 months before Edith was married. That can't have gone yellow." "No, but it may have faded." "Well, then I've a green silk. I feel more as if it was the embarrassment of riches." "I wish I knew what you ought to wear," said Mrs. Hale nervously. Margaret's manner changed instantly. "Shall I go and put them on one after another, Mamma, and then you could see which you liked best?" "But, yes, perhaps that will be best." So off Margaret went. She was very much inclined to play some pranks when she was dressed up at such an unusual hour, to make her rich white silk balloon out into a cheese, to retreat backwards from her mother as if she were the queen. But when she found that these freaks of hers were regarded as interruptions to the serious business, and as such annoyed her mother, she became grave and sedate. What had possessed the world, her world, to fidget so about her dress she could not understand. But that very afternoon, on naming her engagement to Bessie Higgins, apropos of the servant that Mrs. Thornton had promised to inquire about, Bessie quite roused up at the intelligence. "Dear, and are you going to dine at Thornton's at Marlborough Mills?" "Yes, Bessie. Why are you so surprised?" "Oh, I dunno, but they visit with all the first folk in Milton." "And you don't think we're quite the first folk in Milton, eh, Bessie?" Bessie's cheeks flushed a little at her thought being thus easily read. "Well," said she, "you see, they're thinking a deal of money here, and I reckon you've not getting much." "No," said Margaret, "that's very true. But we are educated people, and have lived amongst educated people. Is there anything so wonderful in our being asked out to dinner by a man who owns himself inferior to my father by coming to him to be instructed? I don't mean to blame Mr. Thornton. Few drapers' assistants, as he was once, could have made themselves what he is." "But can you get dinners back in your small house? Thornton's house is 3 times as big." "Well, I think we could manage to give Mr. Thornton a dinner back, as you call it. Perhaps not in such a large room, nor with so many people, but I don't think we've thought about it at all in that way." "I never thought you'd be dining with Thorntons," repeated Bessie. "Why, the mayor himself dines there, and the members of Parliament and all." "I think I could support the honour of meeting the mayor of Milton." "But them ladies dress so grand," said Bessie, with an anxious look at Margaret's print gown, which her Milton eyes appraised at 7 pence a yard. Margaret's face dimpled up into a merry laugh. "Thank you, Bessie, for thinking so kindly about my looking nice among all the smart people. But I've plenty of grand gowns. A week ago I should have said they were far too grand for anything I should ever want again. But as I'm to dine at Mr. Thornton's, and perhaps to meet the mayor, I shall put on my very best gown, you may be sure." "What will you wear?" asked Bessie, somewhat relieved. "White silk," said Margaret. "A gown I had for a cousin's wedding a year ago." "That'll do," said Bessie, falling back into her chair. "I should be loath to have you looked down upon."
Oh, I'll be fine enough, if that will save me from being looked down upon in Milton."
"I wish I could see you dressed up," said Bessie. "I reckon you're not what folk would call pretty. You've not red and white enough for that, but don't you know I had dreamt of you long afore I ever seed you."
"Nonsense, Bessie."
"Aye, but I did. Your very face, looking with your clear, steadfast eyes out of the darkness, with your hair blown off from your brow and going out like rays round your forehead, which was just as smooth and as straight as it is now, and you always came to give me strength, which I seemed to gather out of your deep comforting eyes, and you were dressed in shining raiment, just as you're going to be dressed. So, you see, it was you."
"Nay, Bessie," said Margaret gently.
"It was but a dream. And why might not I dream a dream in my affliction as well as others? Did not many a one in the Bible? Aye, and see visions too? Why, even my father thinks a deal of dreams. I tell you again, I saw you as plainly coming swiftly towards me, with your hair blown back with the very swiftness of the motion, just like the way it grows, a little standing off like, and the white shining dress on you've gotten to wear. Let me come and see you in it. I want to see you and touch you as in very deed you were in my dream. My dear Bessie, it is quite a fancy of yours. Fancy or no fancy, you've come as I knew you would when I saw your movement in my dream, and when you're here about me, I reckon I feel easier in my mind and comforted, just as a fire comforts one on a dree day. You said it were on the 21st. Please God, I'll come and see you."
"Oh, Bessie, you may come and welcome, but don't talk so. It really makes me sorry. It does indeed."
"Then I'll keep it to myself, if I bite my tongue out. Not but what it's true for all that."
Margaret was silent. At last she said, "Let us talk about it sometimes if you think it true, but not now. Tell me, has your father turned out?"
"Aye,"
said Bessie heavily, in a manner very different from that she had spoken in but a minute or two before.
"He and many other, all Hampers men, and many a one besides. The women are as bad as the men in their savageness this time. Food is high, and they mun have food for their chowder, I reckon. Suppose Thornton sent 'em their dinner out, the same money spent on potatoes and meal would keep many a crying babby quiet and hush up its mother's heart for a bit."
"Don't speak so," said Margaret. "You'll make me feel wicked and guilty in going to this dinner."
"No," said Bessie. "Some's pre-elected to sumptuous feasts and purple and fine linen. Maybe you're one on 'em. Others toil and moil all their lives long, and the very dogs are not pitiful in our days as they were in the days of Lazarus. But if you ask me to cool your tongue with the tip of my finger, I'll come across the great gulf to you just for the thought of what you've been to me here. Bessie, you're very feverish. I can tell it in the touch of your hand as well as in what you're saying. It won't be division enough in that awful day that some of us have been beggars here and some of us have been rich. We shall not be judged by that poor accident, but by our faithful following of Christ." Margaret got up and found some water, and soaking her pocket handkerchief in it, she laid the cool wetness on Bessie's forehead and began to chafe the stone-cold feet. Bessie shut her eyes and allowed herself to be soothed. At last she said, "You'd have been deaved out of your 5 wits as well as me if you'd had one body after another coming in to ask for father, and staying to tell me each one their tale. Some spoke of deadly hatred, and made my blood run cold with the terrible things they said of the masters, but more, being women, kept playing plain, and with the tears running down their cheeks, and never wiped away nor heeded of the price of meat, and how their childer could not sleep at nights for the hunger." "And do they think the strike will mend this?" asked Margaret. "They say so," replied Bessie. "They do say trade has been good for long, and the masters has made no end of money. How much father doesn't know, but in course the union does, and, as is natural, they're wanting their share of the profits now that food is getting dear, and the union says they'll not be doing their duty if they don't make the masters give 'em their share. But masters is getting the upper hand somehow, and I'm feared they'll keep it now and evermore. It's like the great battle of Armageddon, the way they keep on grinning and fighting at each other, till, even while they fight, they're picked off into the pit." Just then Nicholas Higgins came in. He caught his daughter's last words.
"Aye, and I'll fight on too, and I'll get it this time. It'll not take long for to make 'em give in, for they've getting a pretty lot of orders all under contract, and they'll soon find out they better give us our 5% than lose the profit they'll gain, let alone the fine for not fulfilling the contract. Ah, my masters, I know who'll win."
Margaret fancied from his manner that he must have been drinking, not so much from what he said as from the excited way in which he spoke, and she was rather confirmed in this idea by the evident anxiety Bessie showed to hasten her departure. Bessie said to her, "The 21st, that's Thursday week. I may come and see you dressed for Thornton's, I reckon. What time is your dinner?" Before Margaret could answer, Higgins broke out,
"Thornton's? Art going to dine at Thornton's? Ask him to give you a bumper to the success of his orders. By the 21st, I reckon, he'll be pottered in his brains how to get 'em done in time. Tell him there's 700'll come marching into Marlborough Mills the morning after he gives the 5%, and we'll help him through his contract in no time. You'll have 'em all there, my master Hamper. He's one of the old-fashioned sort. Never mates a man about an oath or a curse. I should think he were going to die if he spoke me civil. But, after all, his bark's worth and his bite, and you may tell him one of his turnouts said so if you like. But you'll have a lot of prize mill owners at Thornton's. I should like to get speech of them when they're a bit inclined to sit still after dinner and couldna run for the life on 'em. I'd tell 'em my mind. I'd speak up again the hard way they're driving on us."
"Goodbye," said Margaret hastily. "Goodbye, Bessie. I shall look to see you on the 21st if you're well enough." The medicines and treatment which Dr. Donaldson had ordered for Mrs. Hale did her so much good at first that not only she herself, but Margaret began to hope that he might have been mistaken and that she could recover permanently. As for Mr. Hale, although he had never had an idea of the serious nature of their apprehensions, he triumphed over their fears with an evident relief, which proved how much his glimpse into the nature of them had affected him. Only Dixon croaked forever into Margaret's ear. However, Margaret defied the raven and would hope. They needed this gleam of brightness indoors, for out of doors, even to their uninstructed eyes, there was a gloomy, brooding appearance of discontent. Mr. Hale had his own acquaintances among the working men, and was depressed with their earnestly told tales of suffering and long endurance. They would have scorned to speak of what they had to bear to anyone who might, from his position, have understood it without their words. But here was this man, from a distant county, who was perplexed by the workings of the system into the midst of which he was thrown, and each was eager to make him a judge and to bring witness of his own causes for irritation. Then Mr. Hale brought all his budget of grievances and laid it before Mr. Thornton, for him, with his experience as a master, to arrange them and explain their origin, which he always did on sound economical principles, showing that
as trade was conducted, there must always be a waxing and waning of commercial prosperity, and that in the waning a certain number of masters as well as of men must go down into ruin and be no more seen among the ranks of the happy and prosperous. He spoke as if this consequence were so entirely logical that neither employers nor employed had any right to complain if it became their fate, the employer to turn aside from the race he could no longer run, with a bitter sense of incompetency and failure, wounded in the struggle, trampled down by his fellows in their haste to get rich, slighted where he once was honored, humbly asking for, instead of bestowing, employment with a lordly hand. Of course, speaking so of the fate that, as a master, might be his own in the fluctuations of commerce, he was not likely to have more sympathy with that of the workmen, who were passed by in the swift, merciless improvement or alteration, who would fain lie down and quietly die out of the world that needed them not, but felt as if they could never rest in their graves for the clinging cries of the beloved and helpless they would leave behind, who envied the power of the wild bird that can feed her young with her very heart's blood. Margaret's whole soul rose up against him while he reasoned in this way, as if commerce were everything and humanity nothing. She could hardly thank him for the individual kindness which brought him that very evening to offer her, for the delicacy which made him understand that he must offer her privately every convenience for illness that his own wealth or his mother's foresight had caused them to accumulate in their household, and which, as he learnt from Dr. Donaldson, Mrs. Hale might possibly require. His presence, after the way he had spoken, his bringing before her the doom which she was vainly trying to persuade herself might yet be averted from her mother, all conspired to set Margaret's teeth on edge as she looked at him and listened to him. What business had he to be the only person, except Dr. Donaldson and Dixon, admitted to the awful secret which she held shut up in the most dark and sacred recess of her heart, not daring to look at it unless she invoked heavenly strength to bear the sight, that some day soon she should cry aloud for her mother, and no answer would come out of the blank, dumb darkness. Yet he knew all. She saw it in his pitying eyes. She heard it in his grave and tremulous voice. How reconciled those eyes, that voice, with the hard-reasoning, dry, merciless way in which he laid down axioms of trade and serenely followed them out to their full consequences? The discord jarred upon her inexpressibly, the more because of the gathering woe of which she heard from Bessie. To be sure, Nicholas Higgins, the father, spoke differently. He had been appointed a committee man, and said that he knew secrets of which the exoteric knew nothing. He said this more expressly and particularly on the very day before Mrs. Thornton's dinner party, when Margaret, going in to speak to Bessie, found him arguing the point with Boucher, the neighbor of whom she had frequently heard mention, as by turns exciting Higgins's compassion as an unskillful workman with a large family depending upon him for support, and, at other times, enraging his more energetic and sanguine neighbor by his want of what the latter called spirit. It was very evident that Higgins was in a passion when Margaret entered. Boucher stood, with both hands on the rather high mantelpiece, swaying himself a little on the support which his arms, thus placed, gave him, and looking wildly into the fire with a kind of despair that irritated Higgins, even while it went to his heart. Bessie was rocking herself violently backwards and forwards, as was her wont, Margaret knew by this time, when she was agitated. Her sister Mary was tying on her bonnet in great clumsy bows, as suited her great clumsy fingers, to go to her fustian cutting, blubbering out loud the while, and evidently longing to be away from a scene that distressed her. Margaret came in upon this scene. She stood for a moment at the door, then, her finger on her lips, she stole to a seat on the squab near Bessie. Nicholas saw her come in,
and greeted her with a gruff but not unfriendly nod. Mary hurried out of the house, catching gladly at the open door and crying aloud when she got away from her father's presence. It was only John Boucher that took no notice whatever who came in and who went out.
"It's no use, Higgins, who cannot live long a this'n, who's just sinking away, not for want of meat herself, but because who cannot stand the sight of the little ones clemmin'. Aye, clemmin'. 5 shillings a week may do well enough for thee, with but 2 mouths to fill, and one on 'em a wench who can welly earn her own meat. But it's clemmin' to us, and I'll tell thee plain, if who dies, as I'm afeard who will afore we've getten the 5%, I'll fling the money back in the master's face and say, be dommed to you, be dommed to the whole cruel world o' you that couldna leave me the best wife that ever bore chowder to a man. And look thee, lad, I'll hate thee and the whole pack of the Union. Aye, and chase you through heaven with my hatred. I will, lad, I will, if you're leading me astray in this matter. Thou saidst, Nicholas, on Wednesday se'nnight, and it's now Tuesday in the 2nd week, that afore a fortnight we'd ha' the masters comin' a-begging to us to take back our work at our own wage, and time's nearly up, and there's our little Jack lying abed too weak to cry, but just every now and then sobbing up his heart for want of food. Our little Jack, I tell thee, lad, who's never looked up sin he were born, and who loves him as if he were her very life, as he is. For I reckon he'll cost me that precious price, our little Jack, who wakened me each morn with putting his sweet little lips to my great rough foul face, a-seeking a smooth place to kiss, and he lies clemmin'."
Here the deep sobs choked the poor man, and Nicholas looked up, with eyes brimful of tears, to Margaret before he could gain courage to speak.
"Hold up, man. Thy little Jack shallna clem. I hae getten brass, and we'll go buy the chap a sup o' milk and a good 4-pounder this very minute. What's mine's thine, sure enough, in thou'st did want. Only, do not lose heart, man," continued he, as he fumbled in a teapot for what money he had. "I'll lay you my heart and soul will win for this. It's but bearing on 1 more week, and you just see the way the masters'll come round, praying on us to come back to our mills. And the Union, that's to say, we'll take care you've enough for the childer and the missus. So do not turn faint heart, and go to the tyrants a-seeking work."
The man turned round at these words, turned round a face so white and gaunt and tear-furrowed and hopeless that its very calm forced Margaret to weep.
"You know well that a worse a tyrant than e'er the master's worse is, clem to death, and see 'em a clem to death ere you dare go again the Union. You know it well, Nicholas, for you're one on 'em. You may be kind hearts, each separate, but once banded together, you've no more pity for a man than a wild, hunger-maddened wolf."
Nicholas had his hand on the lock of the door. He stopped and turned round on Boucher, close following.
"So help me God, man alive, if I think not I'm doing best for thee and for all on us. If I'm going wrong when I think I'm going right, it's their sin who have left me where I am, in my ignorance. I have thought till my brains ached. Believe me, John, I have. And I say again, there's no help for us but having faith in the Union. They'll win the day, see if they do not."
Not one word had Margaret or Bessie spoken. They had hardly uttered the sighing that the eyes of each called to the other to bring up from the depths of her heart. At last, Bessie said, "I never thought to hear Father call on God again, but you heard him say, so help me God." "Yes," said Margaret. "Let me bring you what money I can spare. Let me bring you a little food for that poor man's children. Don't let them know it comes from anyone but your father. It will be but little." Bessie lay back without taking any notice of what Margaret said. She did not cry. She only quivered up her breath. "My heart's drained dry of tears," she said. "Boucher's been in these days past a-telling me of his fears and his troubles. He's but a weak kind of chap, I know, but is a man for that, and though I've been angry many a time afore now, wi' him and his wife, as knew no more nor him how to manage yet. You see, old folks isn't wise. Yet God lets 'em live, aye, and gives 'em someone to love and be loved by, just as good as Solomon. And if sorrow comes to them they love, it hurts 'em as sore as ever it did Solomon. I can't make it out. Perhaps it's as well such a one as Boucher has the Union to see after 'em. But I'd just like for to see the men as make the Union and put 'em one by one face to face with Boucher. I reckon if they heard 'em, they'd tell 'em if I cotched 'em one by one, he might go back and get what he could for his work, even if it weren't so much as they ordered.
Margaret sat utterly silent. How was she ever to go away into comfort and forget that man's voice with the tone of unutterable agony, telling more by far than his words of what he had to suffer? She took out her purse. She had not much in it of what she could call her own, but what she had she put into Bessie's hand without speaking.
Thank you. There's many on 'em gets no more, and is not so bad off, leastways does not show it as he does. But father won't let him want now he knows. You see, Boucher's been pulled down with his childer, and her being so cranky, and all they could pawn is gone this last 12-month. You're not to think we're letting him clem, for all we're a bit pressed ourself. If neighbours don't see after neighbours, I don't know who will.
Bessie seemed almost afraid lest Margaret should think they had not the will, and to a certain degree the power, of helping one whom she evidently regarded as having a claim upon them.
Besides, she went on, father is sure and positive the masters must give in within these next few days, that they cannot hold on much longer. But I thank you all the same. I thank you for myself as much as for Boucher, for it just makes my heart warm to you more and more.
Bessie seemed much quieter today, but fearfully languid and exhausted. As she finished speaking, she looked so faint and weary that Margaret became alarmed.
It's naught, said Bessie. It's not death yet. I had a fearful night with dreams, or somewhat like dreams, for I were wide awake, and I'm all in a swooning daze today. Only yon poor chap made me alive again. No, it's not death yet, but death is not far off. Aye, cover me up, and I'll maybe sleep, if the cough will let me. Good night. Good afternoon, mayhappen, I should say, but the light is dim and misty today.
So I had said that there were some things that I wanted to touch base with you on after we've listened. In chapter 19, were you able to tell that something was wrong with Bessie from the way she was talking? Well, I was listening to it for the first time and then going back and reading it. I kept thinking, wow, Gaskell's really missing the mark with Bessie. She's writing her weird this chapter. And then all of a sudden, you have Margaret saying, whoa, you're feverish. I can tell not only by your touch, but I can tell by the way you're talking. And I thought, oh, wow. Gaskell just telegraphed that so clearly. I picked right up on it and didn't realize it was on purpose. That's kind of cool. And did you hear it's so complicated. Did you hear in chapter 18, Thornton was explaining one of the reasons why things were starting to become kind of dire for people in the cotton industry. And it was because of the Americans. They were entering the marketplace finally, and that disrupted lots because they could make stuff for cheaper. Is this ringing any bells? But the thing that he did in that chapter that really drove me nuts, just me being me, was when he was saying his workers shouldn't be questioning him because they should trust that he is doing the right thing by them and paying them the right amount. Now, unions were not illegal in England at this time. In 1799 and 1800, there were laws on the books, that made it illegal to unionize. But in 1824, those laws were repealed and unionizing was just fine. So there's nothing that they're doing that's wrong, except that they are implying to Mr. Thornton that he's not doing his job properly. Now, I know from my own personal experience that the jobs that I've had where my supervisor, my manager, my boss has let me understand, let me know what the big picture was. Yes, I know this is a ridiculous deadline. I actually know it's an impossible deadline. This is what happened, and this is what the client is doing, and this is why it doesn't matter that it's ridiculous. We have to meet this deadline anyway. When I get that information, I calm down, and then I can focus, and then I can do my work. If I don't get that information, I start to obsess about how stupid everybody else is and what lousy management I'm working for. And if they only understood, because I evidently am that kind of personality type that needs to know that there is a captain holding the rudder. And I prefer to know if we're about to hit rapids or if it's smooth sailing. I want to know what they're seeing in the window up on deck. So when Thornton denies that to his workers, it just got my hackles up. I was so like, Thornton, Newman. And then, of course, to change and see what the strike is doing to Higgins and to Bessie and to Boucher. Now, this is the first time we've seen Boucher. He is an important character. I know he shows up kind of late. We're already in the 140-page range, but he is critical because Higgins's children are grown and one of them is still able to go out and work for herself. We don't see real deprivation with Higgins. He's managed to put some money by. They're doing fine. Boucher is closer to average. A bunch of kids, a wife who's not well, and this is his only income. This is it. And if you've got that many kids, there's no way you can put money aside. And now the baby's going to starve to death because of the strike. So that sets us up for the middle part of the book. Because, of course, Margaret is there listening to that right before she is about to go to dinner at Thornton's. And that is where we'll pick up next time. I hope you have a great couple of weeks. I will talk to you as soon as I possibly can. And then we will party with the Thorntons. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
344, chapters 20 and 21.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion.
Episode 344, again with the moving? Well, hello. Oh, how I have missed you. It's impossible for me to express just how much I've missed you, because the fact of having missed you means I moved twice in 3 weeks, but I'm still not done with the moving thing. This last one really almost did me in. I've discovered that I am even more of a nester than I thought I was, and having a completely unsettled home environment, one where there are things that don't work like air conditioning that I have no control over, really does bad things to me. So I appreciate your forbearance and your patience. I especially appreciate the good wishes and lovely emails that I have gotten from many of you saying, good grief, Heather, chill. If you skip a week, it's okay. But it isn't okay because this week's chapters are really awesome. And I felt really bad not being able to put them out right away for you. But because so much time has passed, I've collected a bunch of other stuff too, and then it was, So if you are among the people who signed up for the CraftLit mailing list, you received an email on Friday saying, holy cow, I'm not going to make it, and I'm really sorry. I'll try and get the podcast out as fast as I can. Part of what happened was, yes, I couldn't podcast while dripping on the keyboard and microphone, as I would have short-circuited them, and the air conditioning was out for an unspecified length of time. It was quite an extensive outage on some very hot days. And then the day that it got fixed was, of course, cool and lovely and wonderful. I also, when I thought I was recording last week, one of the things that happened as I was sitting here writing frantically was my phone pinged me and said, watch the live stream of the 9/11 Memorial Museum dedication. And my brain, of course, went, what? 9/11 Memorial Museum? Why, I worked on curriculum for the 9/11 Memorials Museum. I'm very interested to see what this dedication ceremony is going to look like. So I went ahead and I flipped it on my phone, and I'm watching, and it was lovely. It was lovely. It was classy. They held the dedication exactly where I thought they would, in the big chamber that you have to walk down into that's up against the slurry wall. And if you ever saw pictures of them as they were excavating the pit, you probably noticed that the wall closest to the west, closest to the Hudson River side of the pit, was a big concrete wall with what looked like ginormous nuts and bolts sticking out of it at funky angles. And as far as I understand, those are kind of like nuts and bolts. That's what's holding that slurry wall up. And that's what's keeping the Hudson River out of the foundation of that whole area. And so when you're down in the Memorial Museum, you are down in the sub-basements of what had been the World Trade Center towers. And it's phenomenal. And they did such a lovely job of showing you bits and pieces of the artifacts that I talked about. I think it had to be early 2011 or even maybe 2010 when I was working on this, because I know I was back in Tucson and I can remember the room I was sitting in when I was working on it. So they showed some of my favorite artifacts. I have linked to one of the many articles on the memorial opening that happened that day. And the first picture on the page that I linked to is something that I told you about, I believe, those many years ago, that there was a fire truck. And if you approach the fire truck from the position that they had it in, at least when they were setting stuff up, I don't know if it's still in this position, but you approached it from an angle where you look at it and you go, oh, well, it's a fire truck and it's been, awfully scratched up and it's kind of dusty and it looks like it's been through the ringer, sure. But it isn't until you get to the other end of it that you realize that the entire section of the fire truck was sheared off and completely compressed and smushed. It no longer looks like a fire truck. It looks like strands of metal that have gone through meat grinder. It's just shreds of metal. And, that's what happens when a building lands on a fire truck, is that. So there's stuff that's heartbreaking. There's the shoes of a woman who's in a very famous picture, carrying her shoes, having run down, 68 flights of stairs and covered in ash and weeping. And her shoes are in the Memorial Museum. And these iconic things that we all saw photographs of or that we all heard stories about, they're all there. And it was lovely. And it was heartbreaking in a good kind of way. And then my principal walked out on stage. And I had a sneaking suspicion she was going to be there. And I was so happy to see her. For one thing, she's just gorgeous and she hasn't changed at all in all of the time that it's been. I have aged considerably. She has not at all. And she was one of the last people to speak. So if you watched this, there was that really lovely, short, dark-haired Puerto Rican woman who got up to speak at the end talking about after being involved in this tragedy and losing her sister in Cantor Fitzgerald, she got to go build a school in Afghanistan, which she thought was the perfect blow it out your shorts bin Laden moment of saying, oh, really? You're going to drop buildings on me? Guess what? I'm going to build a school for girls and boys, but there are going to be girls there. And that's what I'm going to do back. And I just love that. And what a great way to end it. It was lovely. Everybody who spoke, it really was. It was just great. I really, really, really liked watching it. And that doesn't mean I didn't cry. It just means I really, really liked it. And And so, yeah, isn't that a weird thing, though? Something like that could actually make you feel more calm and like you're still in a world that you at least know. It may not be a wonderful world, it may not be a beautiful world, but it's at least a known world, and that was oddly comforting, which is interesting, she says now, suddenly thinking about it, because isn't that a little bit like Margaret Hale? That the longer she is in this culture that she didn't know at all, the more comfortable she is getting with it, and that actually pops up in today's chapters. So chapter 20, our first chapter today, is the party that we've been waiting for. And we know what Margaret's going to wear, and we know that she is kind of not looking forward to it. And we know that Mrs. Thornton is not so thrilled about inviting her in the first place. And, drama. But we also, it's the first time that we're going to see Margaret in her element, in that she is at a fashionable party. And I'm not entirely making air quotes. I'm making half air quotes because it's fashionable. It's actually quite fashionable and desirable to be there if you are of that world, Milton Northern. And it's probably not quite so fashionable if you are straight from London. But she is neither. She went from London to Helstone and spent time there before they left. And so she's, twice removed now from London. It's been a long time since she's worn these clothes. It's been a long time since she's been at a place like this. And it is going to be a bit of culture shock, which isn't a surprise to any of us. But some of the things that she thinks while she is there were certainly a surprise to me. In fact, there was an article earlier this week, I think it was in The Guardian. I will go dig this up, but it was hilarious because it was little short snippets of different people's favorite books and the characters that they were jazzed by. And Margaret Hale shows up in one of these little blurbs. And there's this awesome little throwaway line that Mr. Thornton is Darcy with flat vowels. But it also, just love that. But it's also highlighted something that I think a lot of us are starting to notice and be kind of curious about, that Margaret Hale is really so not a Jane Austen heroine. Because if she were, this party would be the first major turning point, the first big pinnacle of romance between the two people who we know are going to have to fall in love somehow, some way. We just don't know how, and we don't know when, and we don't know how long it's going to take. But that is not the case in this story. Margaret has other things on her mind. She has the strikers, the people who are on strike have turned out. And listen there's a one line, it goes by pretty quickly, about what has stopped strikes in the past. And it should be pretty chilling, since we've spent so much time with Bessie and with Higgins and even with Boucher. We're starting to get more and more of a picture of what's really going on with the workers now that they are on strike. The statement that is made about what has ended these uprisings previously threw me, because I wasn't expecting it. And it made me very worried. And then you've got, Mr. Hale, who's just, dude is like wishful thinking central. He absolutely does not seem capable of connecting reality. And I am not sure if Elizabeth Gaskell meant for him to come across as quite so wussy, or if it's just a byproduct of what he had to be in order to allow Margaret to be stronger. I'm not sure. I have not sussed that one out yet, but is a little on the wishful thinking side in this one. There's also that lovely dichotomy between people coming from the rural South or from London and appreciating the pastoral and appreciating kind of Arcadia, and that is the height of beauty and culture and pride is, your gardens or your the meadow, or how many gorgeous fields there are in your valley, how great your hedgerows are. And in Milton Northern, the pride would be in the factories. It would be in your technology. It would be in how loud the place was when everything was working, and how that was a physical fact. You know, that kind of sound is a physical fact of your wealth, of your prosperity, of your ingenuity, that you were able to put this thing together and make it work. That would have been huge, and that is so different from anything Margaret, or even most of us, have probably ever known. And what with this being a book about a young woman written by a woman, you know that at some point something's going to give, and you are going to have a fashion break. There will be a moment where fashion is discussed, and it happens in this chapter, and it's really rather brief, but it is interesting because, of course, the styles are very different from the styles during Jane Austen's time. So you can listen for that. If you are somebody who read a lot of Jane Austen, this will be new. But it's all, and of course, we don't get the fashion thing from Dickens, even with Lady Dedlock in Bleak House. At the most, you get descriptions of kind of her regal posture, her neck, or her hair is never out of place, but you really don't get clothing. Here you're going to get some clothing, which is fun, but you're also going to get conversation. And that part of this chapter, I remember the first time I read through this, blew me away. Because again, not Jane Austen, not Charlotte Bronte, not any chick lit I've read from this era, or reasonably, relatively before this era. I was stunned. And I hope you are too. It seemed to me to be such a welcome departure. And again, one of those things where in reading the book, I keep thinking, wow, this is exactly what happened with Wilkie Collins. I keep thinking, why isn't this book read in school? Why isn't anyone studying this book the way that we do Pride and Prejudice or anything like that? Because this is a fascinating look at human nature, for one thing, but also really kind of blowing apart the myths of the quiet, retiring, perfect woman, because Margaret isn't. I mean, she obviously she still knows her place, quote unquote. That time I am using air quotes, but she's way more out there than I would ever have guessed. And then chapter 21, which we'll just listen to back, is the follow-up. Because, of course, if you're going to have fun, one must pay for it. And so not everything can be a bed of roses. And 20 and 21 are kind of the back-to-back of this one particular night and the aftermath of it. And there's one term that's going to throw you, but I promise I will explain it when we get to the other side. So that is where I am going to leave you and let you listen to chapters 20 and 21 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 20. Men and Gentlemen.
Old and young, boy, let 'em all eat. I have it. Let 'em have 10 tire of teeth apiece. I care not.
Rollo, Duke of Normandy. Margaret went home so painfully occupied with what she had heard and seen that she hardly knew how to rouse herself up to the duties which awaited her. The necessity for keeping up a constant flow of cheerful conversation for her mother, who, now that she was unable to go out, always looked to Margaret's return from the shortest walk as bringing in some news.
And can your factory friend come on Thursday to see you dressed?
She was so ill I never thought of asking her, said Margaret dolefully.
Dear, everybody is ill now, I think, said Mrs. Hale, with a little of the jealousy which one invalid is apt to feel of another. But it must be very sad to be ill in one of those little back streets.
her kindly nature prevailing and the old Helstone habits of thought returning. "It's bad enough here. What could you do for her, Margaret? Mr. Thornton has sent me some of his old port wine since you went out. Would a bottle of that do her good, think you?" "No, Mamma. I don't believe they are very poor. At least, they don't speak as if they were, and, at any rate, Bessie's illness is consumption. She won't want wine. Perhaps I might take her a little preserve made of our dear Helstone fruit. No, there's another family whom I should like to give— Oh, Mamma, Mamma, how am I to dress up in my finery and go off and away to smart parties after the sorrow I have seen today?" exclaimed Margaret, bursting the bounds she had preordained for herself before she came in, and telling her mother of what she had seen and heard at Higgins's cottage. It distressed Mrs. Hale excessively. It made her restlessly irritated till she could do something. She directed Margaret to pack up a basket in the very drawing-room to be sent there and then to the family, and was almost angry with her for saying that it would not signify if it did not go till morning, as she knew Higgins had provided for their immediate wants, and she herself had left money with Bessie. Mrs. Hale called her unfeeling for saying this, and never gave herself breathing time till the basket was sent out of the house. Then she said, "After all, we may have been doing wrong. It was only the last time Mr. Thornton was here that he said those were no true friends who helped to prolong the struggle by assisting the turnouts, and this Boucher man was a turnout, was he not?" The question was referred to Mr. Hale by his wife when he came upstairs, fresh from giving a lesson to Mr. Thornton, which had ended in conversation, as was their wont. Margaret did not care if their gifts had prolonged the strike. She did not think far enough for that in her present excited state. Mr. Hale listened and tried to be as calm as a judge. He recalled all that had seemed so clear not half an hour before as it came out of Mr. Thornton's lips, and then he made an unsatisfactory compromise. His wife and daughter had not only done quite right in this instance, but he did not see for a moment how they could have done otherwise. Nevertheless, as a general rule, it was very true what Mr. Thornton said, that as the strike, if prolonged, must end in the master's bringing hands from a distance, if, indeed, the final result were not, as it had often been before, the invention of some machine which would diminish the need of hands at all, why, it was clear enough that the kindest thing was to refuse all help which might bolster them up in their folly. But as to this Boucher, he would go and see him the first thing in the morning and try to find out what could be done for him. Mr. Hale went the next morning as he proposed. He did not find Boucher at home, but he had a long talk with his wife, promised to ask for an infirmary order for her, and seeing the plenty provided by Mrs. Hale, and somewhat lavishly used by the children, who were masters downstairs in their father's absence, he came back with a more consoling and cheerful account than Margaret had dared to hope for. Indeed, what she had said the night before had prepared her father for so much worse a state of things that, by a reaction of his imagination, he described all as better than it really was. "But I will go again and see the man himself," said Mr. Hale. "I hardly know as yet how to compare one of these houses with our Helstone cottages. I see furniture here which our labourers would never have thought of buying, and food commonly used which they would consider luxuries. Yet, for these very families there seems no other resource now that their weekly wages are stopped but the pawn-shop. One had need to learn a different language and measure by a different standard up here in Milton." Bessie, too, was rather better this day. Still, she was so weak that she seemed to have entirely forgotten her wish to see Margaret dressed, if, indeed, that had not been the feverish desire of a half-delirious state. Margaret could not help comparing this strange dressing of hers, to go where she did not care to be, her heart heavy with various anxieties, with the old merry girlish toilette that she and Edith had performed scarcely more than a year ago. Her only pleasure now in decking herself out was in thinking that her mother would take delight in seeing her dressed. She blushed when Dixon, throwing the drawing-room door open, made an appeal for admiration.
"Miss Hale looks well, Mum, doesn't she? Mrs. Shaw's coral couldn't have come in better. It just gives the right touch of colour, Mum. Otherwise, Miss Margaret, you would have been too pale."
Margaret's black hair was too thick to be plaited. It needed rather to be twisted round and have its fine silkiness compressed into massive coils that encircled her head like a crown, and then were gathered into a large spiral knot behind. She kept its weight together by two large coral pins, like small arrows for length. Her white silk sleeves were looped up with strings of the same material, and on her neck, just below the base of her curved and milk-white throat, there lay heavy coral beads.
"Oh, Margaret, how I should like to be going with you to one of the old Barrington assemblies, taking you as Lady Beresford used to take me."
Margaret kissed her mother for this little burst of maternal vanity, but she could hardly smile at it. She felt so much out of spirits. "I would rather stay at home with you, much rather, Mamma."
"Nonsense, darling. Be sure you notice the dinner well. I shall like to hear how they manage these things in Milton, particularly the second course, dear. Look what they have instead of game."
Mrs. Hale would have been more than interested. She would have been astonished if she had seen the sumptuousness of the dinner table and its appointments. Margaret, with her London cultivated taste, felt the number of delicacies to be oppressive. 1/2 of the quantity would have been enough, and the effect lighter and more elegant. But it was one of Mrs. Thornton's rigorous laws of hospitality that of each separate dainty enough should be provided for all the guests to partake if they felt inclined. Careless to abstemiousness in her daily habits, it was part of her pride to set a feast before such of her guests as cared for it. Her son shared this feeling. He had never known, though he might have imagined, and had the capability to relish, any kind of society but that which depended on an exchange of superb meals, and even now, though he was denying himself the personal expenditure of an unnecessary sixpence, and had more than once regretted that the invitations for this dinner had been sent out, still, as it was to be, he was glad to see the old magnificence of preparation. Margaret and her father were the first to arrive. Mr. Hale was anxiously punctual to the time specified. There was no one upstairs in the drawing-room but Mrs. Thornton and Fanny. Every cover was taken off, and the apartment blazed forth in yellow silk damask and a brilliantly flowered carpet. Every corner seemed filled up with ornament until it became a weariness to the eye and presented a strange contrast to the bald ugliness of the lookout into the great mill yard, where wide folding gates were thrown open for the admission of carriages. The mill loomed high on the left-hand side of the windows, casting a shadow down from its many stories which darkened the summer evening before its time.
My son was engaged up to the last moment on business. He will be here directly, Mr. Hale. May I beg you to take a seat?"
Mr. Hale was standing at one of the windows as Mrs. Thornton spoke. He turned away, saying, "Don't you find such close neighborhood to the mill rather unpleasant at times?" She drew herself up.
"Never. I am not become so fine as to desire to forget the source of my son's wealth and power. Besides, there is not such another factory in Milton. One room alone is 220 square yards.
I meant that the smoke and the noise, the constant going out and coming in of the work-people might be annoying."
"I agree with you, Mr. Hale," said Fanny. "There is a continual smell of steam and oily machinery, and the noise is perfectly deafening."
I have heard noise that was called music far more deafening. The engine room is at the straight end of the factory, We hardly hear it, except in summer weather, when all the windows are open, and as for the continual murmur of the work-people, it disturbs me no more than the humming of a hive of bees. If I think of it at all, I connect it with my son, and feel how all belongs to him, and that is the head that directs it. Just now, there are no sounds to come from the mill. The hands have been ungrateful enough to turn out, as perhaps you have heard. But the very business of which I spoke when you entered had reference to the steps he is going to take to make 'em learn their place.
The expression on her face, always stern, deepened into dark anger as she said this. Nor did it clear away when Mr. Thornton entered the room, for she saw, in an instant, the weight of care and anxiety which he could not shake off, although his guests received from him a greeting that appeared both cheerful and cordial. He shook hands with Margaret. He knew it was the first time their hands had met, though she was perfectly unconscious of the fact. He inquired after Mrs. Hale, and heard Mr. Hale's sanguine, hopeful account. And glancing at Margaret to understand how far she agreed with her father, he saw that no dissenting shadow crossed her face. And as he looked with this intention, he was struck anew with her great beauty. He had never seen her in such dress before, and yet now it appeared as if such elegance of attire was so befitting her noble figure and lofty serenity of countenance that she ought to go always thus apparelled. She was talking to Fanny about what he could not hear, but he saw his sister's restless way of continually arranging some part of her gown, her wandering eyes now glancing here, now there, but without any purpose in her observation. And he contrasted them uneasily with the large soft eyes that looked forth steadily at one object, as if from out their light beamed some gentle influence of repose. The curving lines of the red lips just parted in the interest of listening to what her companion said. The head a little bent forwards so as to make a long sweeping line from the summit, where the light caught on the glossy raven hair, to the smooth ivory tip of the shoulder. The round white arms and taper hands, laid lightly across each other, but perfectly motionless in their pretty attitude. Mr. Thornton sighed as he took in all this with one of his sudden comprehensive glances. And then he turned his back to the young ladies and threw himself with an effort, but with all his heart and soul, into a conversation with Mr. Hale. More people came, more and more. Fanny left Margaret's side and helped her mother to receive her guests. Mr. Thornton felt that in this influx no one was speaking to Margaret and was restless under this apparent neglect. But he never went near her himself. He did not look at her. Only he knew what she was doing or not doing better than he knew the movements of anyone else in the room. Margaret was so unconscious of herself and so much amused by watching other people that she never thought whether she was left unnoticed or not. Somebody took her down to dinner. She did not catch the name, nor did he seem much inclined to talk to her. There was a very animated conversation going on among the gentlemen. The ladies, for the most part, were silent, employing themselves in taking notes of the dinner and criticizing each other's dresses. Margaret caught the clue to the general conversation, grew interested, and listened attentively. Mr. Horsfall, the stranger, whose visit to the town was the original germ of the party, was asking questions relative to the trade and manufactures of the place, and the rest of the gentlemen, all Milton men, were giving him answers and explanations. Some dispute arose, which was warmly contested. It was referred to Mr. Thornton, who had hardly spoken before, but who now gave an opinion, the grounds of which were so clearly stated that even the opponents yielded. Margaret's attention was thus called to her host. His whole manner as master of the house and entertainer of his friends was so straightforward, yet simple and modest, as to be thoroughly dignified. Margaret thought she had never seen him to so much advantage. When he had come to their house, there had always been something either of over-eagerness or of that kind of vexed annoyance which seemed ready to presuppose that he was unjustly judged, and yet felt too proud to try and make himself better understood. But now, among his fellows, there was no uncertainty as to his position. He was regarded by them as a man of great force of character, of power in many ways. There was no need to struggle for their respect. He had it, and he knew it, and the security of this gave a fine, grand quietness to his voice and ways, which Margaret had missed before. He was not in the habit of talking to ladies, and what he did say was a little formal. To Margaret herself he hardly spoke at all. She was surprised to think how much she enjoyed this dinner. She knew enough now to understand many local interests, nay, even some of the technical words employed by the eager mill owners. She silently took a very decided part in the question they were discussing. At any rate, they talked in desperate earnest, not in the used-up style that wearied her so in the old London parties. She wondered that with all this dwelling on the manufactures and trade of the place, no allusion was made to the strike then pending. She did not yet know how coolly such things were taken by the masters as having only one possible end. To be sure, the men were cutting their own throats as they had done many a time before, but if they would be fools and put themselves into the hands of a rascally set of paid delegates, they must take the consequence. One or two thought Thornton looked out of spirits, and of course he must lose by this turnout. But it was an accident that might happen to themselves any day, and Thornton was as good to manage a strike as anyone, for he was as iron a chap as any in Milton. The hands had mistaken their man in trying that dodge on him, and they chuckled inwardly at the idea of the workmen's discomfiture and defeat in their attempt to alter one iota of what Thornton had decreed. It was rather dull for Margaret after dinner. She was glad when the gentleman came, not merely because she caught her father's eye to brighten her sleepiness up, but because she could listen to something larger and grander than the petty interests which the ladies had been talking about. She liked the exultation in the sense of power which these Milton men had. It might be rather rampant in its display and savour of boasting, but still they seemed to defy the old limits of possibility in a kind of fine intoxication caused by the recollection of what had been achieved and what yet should be. If in her cooler moments she might not approve of their spirit in all things, still there was much to admire in their forgetfulness of themselves in the present, in their anticipated triumphs over all inanimate matter at some future time which none of them should live to see. She was rather startled when Mr. Thornton spoke to her, close at her elbow. "I could see you were on our side in our discussion at dinner, were you not, Miss Hale?" "Certainly, but then I know so little about it. I was surprised, however, to find from what Mr. Horsfall said that there were others who thought in so diametrically opposed a manner as the Mr. Morrison he spoke about. He cannot be a gentleman, is he?" "I am not quite the person to decide on another's gentlemanliness, Miss Hale. I don't quite understand your application of the word, but I should say that this Morrison is no true man. I don't know who he is. I merely judge him from Mr. Horsfall's account." "I suspect my gentleman includes your true man." "And a great deal more, you would imply. I differ from you. A man is to me a higher and completer being than a gentleman." "What do you mean?" asked Margaret. "We must understand the words differently." "I take it that a gentleman is a term that only describes a person in his relation to others, but when we speak of him as a man, we consider him not merely with regard to his fellow men, but in relation to himself,
to life, to time, to eternity. A castaway lonely as Robinson Crusoe, a prisoner immured in a dungeon for life. Nay, even a saint in Patmos has his endurance, his strength, his faith, best described by being spoken of as a man. I am rather weary of this word gentlemanly, which seems to me to be often inappropriately used, and often, too, with such exaggerated distortion of meaning, while the full simplicity of the noun man and the adjective manly are unacknowledged, that I am induced to class it with the cant of the day.
Margaret thought a moment, but before she could speak her slow conviction, he was called away by some of the eager manufacturers, whose speeches she could not hear, though she could guess at their import by the short, clear answers Mr. Thornton gave, which came steady and firm as the boom of a distant minute gun. They were evidently talking of the turnout and suggesting what course had best be pursued. She heard Mr. Thornton say,
"That has been done."
Then came a hurried murmur in which 2 or 3 joined.
"All those arrangements have been made."
Some doubts were implied, some difficulties named by Mr. Slickson, who took hold of Mr. Thornton's arm, the better to impress his words. Mr. Thornton moved slightly away, lifted his eyebrows a very little, and then replied,
"I take the risk. You need not join in it unless you choose."
Still, some more fears were urged.
"I'm not afraid of anything so dastardly as incendiarism. We are open enemies, and I can protect myself from any violence that I apprehend. And I will assuredly protect all others who come to me for work. They know my determination by this time as well and as fully as you do."
Mr. Horsfall took him a little on one side, as Margaret conjectured to ask him some other question about the strike. But in truth, it was to inquire who she herself was, so quiet, so stately, and so beautiful.
"A Milton lady?"
asked he as the name was given.
"No, from the south of England, Hampshire, I believe,"
was the cold, indifferent answer. Mrs. Slickson was catechizing Fanny on the same subject.
"Who is that fine, distinguished-looking girl? A sister of Mr. Horsfall's?" "Oh, dear, no. That is Mr. Hale, her father, talking now to Mr. Stevens. He gives lessons. That is to say, he reads with young men. My brother John goes to him twice a week, and so he begged Mamma to ask them here in hopes of getting him known. I believe we have some of their prospectuses if you would like to have one." "Mr. Thornton, does he really find time to read with a tutor in the midst of all his business, and this abominable strike in hand as well?"
Fanny was not sure from Mrs. Slickson's manner whether she ought to be proud or ashamed of her brother's conduct, and like all people who try and take other people's ought for the rule of their feelings, she was inclined to blush for any singularity of action. Her shame was interrupted by the dispersion of the guests. Chapter 21. The Dark Night. On earth is known to none the smile that is not sister to a tear. Eliot. Margaret and her father walked home. The night was fine, the streets clean, and with her pretty white silk, like Lizzie Lindsay's gown of green satin in the ballad, kilted up to her knee, she was off with her father, ready to dance along with the excitement of the cool, fresh night air.
"I rather think Thornton is not quite easy in his mind about this strike. He seemed very anxious tonight."
"I should wonder if he were not, but he spoke with his usual coolness to the others when they suggested different things just before we came away."
"So he did after dinner as well. It would take a good deal to stir him from his cool manner of speaking, but his face strikes me as anxious."
"I should be if I were he," He must know of the growing anger and hardly smothered hatred of his work-people, who all look upon him as what the Bible calls a hard man, not so much unjust as unfeeling, clear in judgment, standing upon his rights, as no human being ought to stand, considering what we and all our petty rights are in the sight of the Almighty. I am glad you think he looks anxious. When I remember Boucher's half-mad words and ways, I cannot bear to think how coolly Mr. Thornton spoke. In the first place, I am not so convinced as you are about that man Boucher's utter distress. For the moment, he was badly off, I don't doubt. But there is always a mysterious supply of money from these unions, and, from what you said, it was evident the man was of a passionate, demonstrative nature, and gave strong expression to all he felt.
Oh, Papa!
Well, I only want you to do justice to Mr. Thornton, who is, I suspect, of an exactly opposite nature. A man who is far too proud to show his feelings. Just the character I should have thought beforehand you would have admired, Margaret.
So I do. So I should. But I don't feel quite so sure as you do of the existence of those feelings. He is a man of great strength of character, of unusual intellect, considering the few advantages he's had.
Not so few. He has led a practical life from a very early age, has been called upon to exercise judgment and self-control. All that develops one part of the intellect. To be sure, he needs some of the knowledge of the past which gives the truest basis for conjecture as to the future. But he knows this need, he perceives it, and that is something. You are quite prejudiced against Mr. Thornton, Margaret.
He is the first specimen of a manufacturer, of a person engaged in trade that I had ever the opportunity of studying, Papa. He is my first olive. Let me make a face while I swallow it. I know he is good of his kind, and by I shall like the kind. I rather think I am already beginning to do so. I was very much interested by what the gentlemen were talking about, although I did not understand half of it. I was quite sorry when Miss Thornton came to take me to the other end of the room, saying she was sure I should be uncomfortable at being the only lady among so many gentlemen. I had never thought about it. I was so busy listening, and the ladies were so dull, Papa. Oh, so dull! Yet I think it was clever, too. It reminded me of our old game of having each so many nouns to introduce into a sentence.
What do you mean, child?
Asked Mr. Hale. Why, they took nouns that were signs of things which gave evidence of wealth. Housekeepers, undergardeners, extent of glass, valuable lace, diamonds, and all such things. And each one formed her speech so as to bring them all in the prettiest accidental manner possible.
You will be as proud of your one servant when you get her, if all is true about her that Mrs. Thornton says.
To be sure I shall. I felt like a great hypocrite tonight, sitting there in my white silk gown, with my idle hands before me, when I remembered all the good, thorough housework they had done today. They took me for a fine lady, I'm sure.
Even I was mistaken enough to think you looked like a lady, my dear,
said Mr. Hale, quietly smiling. But smiles were changed to white and trembling looks when they saw Dixon's face as she opened the door. "Oh, master! Oh, Miss Margaret! Thank God you are come! Dr. Donaldson is here. The servant next door went for him, for the charwoman has gone home. She's better now, but, oh, sir, I thought she'd have died an hour ago." Mr. Hale caught Margaret's arm to steady himself from falling. He looked at her face and saw an expression upon it of surprise and extremest sorrow, but not the agony of terror that contracted his own unprepared heart. She knew more than he did, and yet She listened with that hopeless expression of awed apprehension. "Oh, I should not have left her, wicked daughter that I am," moaned forth Margaret, as she supported her trembling father's hasty steps upstairs. Dr. Donaldson met them on the landing. "She is better now," he whispered. "The opiate has taken effect. The spasms were very bad. No wonder they frightened your maid, but she'll rally this time." "This time? Let me go to her." Half an hour ago, Mr. Hale was a middle-aged man. Now his sight was dim, his senses wavering, his walk tottering, as if he were 70 years of age. Dr. Donaldson took his arm and led him into the bedroom. Margaret followed close. There lay her mother, with an unmistakable look on her face. She might be better now. She was sleeping, but death had signed her for his own, and it was clear that ere long he would return to take possession. Mr. Hale looked at her for some time without a word. Then he began to shake all over, and turning away from Dr. Donaldson's anxious care, he groped to find the door. He could not see it, although several candles, brought in the sudden affright, were burning and flaring there. He staggered into the drawing-room and felt about for a chair. Dr. Donaldson wheeled one to him and placed him in it. He felt his pulse. "Speak to him, Miss Hale. We must rouse him." "Papa!" said Margaret, with a crying voice that was wild with pain. "Papa, speak to me!" The speculation came again into his eyes, and he made a great effort. "Margaret, did you know of this? Oh, it was cruel of you." "No, sir, it was not cruel," replied Dr. Donaldson with quick decision. "Miss Hale acted under my directions. There may have been mistake, but it was not cruel. Your wife will be a different creature tomorrow, I trust. She has had spasms, as I anticipated, though I did not tell Miss Hale of my apprehensions. She has taken the opiate I brought with me. She will have a good long sleep, and tomorrow that look which has alarmed you so much will have passed away." "But not the disease." Dr. Donaldson glanced at Margaret. Her bent head, her face raised with no appeal for a temporary reprieve, showed that quick observer of human nature that she thought it better that the whole truth should be told. "Not the disease. We cannot touch the disease with all our poor vaunted skill. We can only delay its progress, alleviate the pain it causes. Be a man, sir, a Christian. Have faith in the immortality of the soul, which no pain, no mortal disease can assail or touch." But all the reply he got was in the choked words, "You have never been married, Dr. Donaldson. You do not know what it is." And in the deep, manly sobs which went through the stillness of the night like heavy pulses of agony. Margaret knelt by him, caressing him with tearful caresses. No one, not even Dr. Donaldson, knew how the time went by. Mr. Hale was the first to dare to speak of the necessities of the present moment. "What must we do?" asked he. "Tell us both. Margaret is my staff, my right hand." Dr. Donaldson gave his clear, sensible directions. No fear for tonight, nay, even peace for tomorrow and for many days yet, but no enduring hope of recovery. He advised Mr. Hale to go to bed and leave only one to watch the slumber, which he hoped would be undisturbed. He promised to come again early in the morning, and with a warm and kindly shake of the hand he left them. They spoke but few words. They were too much exhausted by their terror to do more than decide upon the immediate course of action. Mr. Hale was resolved to sit up through the night, and all that Margaret could do was to prevail upon him to rest on the drawing-room sofa. Dixon stoutly and bluntly refused to go to bed, and, as for Margaret,
It was simply impossible that she should leave her mother, let all the doctors in the world speak of husbanding resources and one watcher only being required. So Dixon sat and stared and winked and drooped and picked herself up again with a jerk and finally gave up the battle and fairly snored. Margaret had taken off her gown and tossed it aside with a sort of impatient disgust, put on a dressing gown. She felt as if she never could sleep again, as if her whole senses were acutely vital and all endued with double keenness for the purposes of watching. Every sight and sound, nay, even every thought touched some nerve to the very quick. For more than 2 hours she heard her father's restless movements in the next room. He came perpetually to the door of her mother's chamber, pausing there to listen, till she, not hearing his close unseen presence, went and opened it to tell him how all went on, in reply to the questions his baked lips could hardly form. At last he too fell asleep, and all the house was still. Margaret sat behind the curtain thinking. Far away in time, far away in space, seemed all the interests of past days. Not more than 36 hours ago she cared for Bessie Higgins and her father, and her heart was wrung for Boucher. Now that was all like a dreaming memory of some former life. Everything that had passed out of doors seemed dissevered from her mother, and therefore unreal. Even Harley Street appeared more distinct. There she remembered, as if it were yesterday, how she had pleased herself with tracing out her mother's features in her Aunt Shaw's face, and how letters had come, making her dwell on the thoughts of home, with all the longing of love. Helstone itself was in the dim past. The dull grey days of the preceding winter and spring, so uneventless and monotonous, seemed more associated with what she cared for now above all price. She would fain have caught at the skirts of that departing time and prayed it to return and give her back what she had too little valued while it was yet in her possession. What a vain show life seemed, how unsubstantial and flickering and flitting. It was as if from some aerial belfry high up above the stir and jar of the earth there was a bell continually tolling. All are shadows, all are passing, all is past. And when the morning dawned, cool and grey, like many a happier morning before, when Margaret looked one by one at the sleepers, it seemed as if the terrible night were unreal as a dream. It too was a shadow. It too was past. Mrs. Hale herself was not aware when she awoke how ill she had been the night before. She was rather surprised at Dr. Donaldson's early visit and perplexed by the anxious faces of husband and child. She consented to remain in bed that day, saying she certainly was tired, but the next she insisted on getting up, and Dr. Donaldson gave his consent to her returning into the drawing-room. She was restless and uncomfortable in every position, and before night she became very feverish. Mr. Hale was utterly listless and incapable of deciding on anything. "What can we do to spare Mamma such another night?" asked Margaret on the third day. "It is, to a certain degree, the reaction after the powerful opiates I have been obliged to use. It is more painful for you to see than for her to bear, I believe. But I think if we could get a waterbed, it might be a good thing. Not but what she will be better tomorrow. Pretty much like herself as she was before this attack. Still, I should like her to have a waterbed. Mrs. Thornton has one, I know. I'll try and call there this afternoon." "Stay," said he, his eye catching on Margaret's face, blanched with watching in a sick room. "I'm not sure whether I can go. I have a long round to take.
It would do you no harm to have a brisk walk to Marlborough Street and ask Mrs. Thornton if she can spare it."
"Certainly," said Margaret. "I could go while Mamma is asleep this afternoon. I'm sure Mrs. Thornton would lend it to us." Dr. Donaldson's experience told them rightly. Mrs. Hale seemed to shake off the consequences of her attack and looked brighter and better this afternoon than Margaret had ever hoped to see her again. Her daughter left her after dinner, sitting in her easy-chair with her hand lying in her husband's, who looked more worn and suffering than she by far. Still, he could smile now, rather slowly, rather faintly, it is true, but a day or two before Margaret never thought to see him smile again. It was about 2 miles from their house in Crampton Crescent to Marlborough Street. It was too hot to walk very quickly. An August sun beat straight down into the street at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Margaret went along without noticing anything very different from usual in the first mile and a half of her journey. She was absorbed in her own thoughts and had learnt by this time to thread her way through the irregular stream of human beings that flowed through Milton streets. But by and by she was struck with an unusual heaving among the mass of people in the crowded road on which she was entering. They did not appear to be moving on, so much as talking and listening and buzzing with excitement, without much stirring from the spot where they might happen to be. Still, as they made way for her, and wrapped up in the purpose of her errand, and the necessities that suggested it, she was less quick of observation than she might have been if her mind had been at ease. She had got into Marlborough Street before the full conviction forced itself upon her that there was a restless, oppressive sense of irritation abroad among the people, a thunderous atmosphere, morally as well as physically, around her. From every narrow lane opening out onto Marlborough Street came up a low, distant roar, as of myriads of fierce, indignant voices. The inhabitants of each poor, squalid dwelling were gathered round the doors and windows, if indeed they were not actually standing in the middle of the narrow ways, all with looks intent towards one point. Marlborough Street itself was the focus of all those human eyes that betrayed intensest interest of various kinds, some fierce with anger, some lowering with relentless threats, some dilated with fear or imploring entreaty, and, as Margaret reached the small side entrance by the folding doors in the great dead wall of Marlborough Mill Yard and waited the porter's answer to the bell, she looked round and heard the first long, far-off roll of the tempest, saw the first slow surging wave of the dark crowd come with its threatening crest, tumble over and retreat at the far end of the street, which a moment ago seemed so full of repressed noise, but which now was ominously still. All these circumstances forced themselves on Margaret's notice, but did not sink down into her preoccupied heart. She did not know what they meant, what was their deep significance. While she did know, did feel the keen, sharp pressure of the knife that was soon to stab her through and through by leaving her motherless. She was trying to realize that, in order that, when it came, she might be ready to comfort her father. The porter opened the door cautiously, not nearly wide enough to admit her. "It's you, is it, ma'am?" said he, drawing a long breath and widening the entrance, but still not opening it fully. Margaret went in. He hastily bolted it behind her. "The folk are all coming up here, I reckon?" asked he. "I don't know. Something unusual seemed going on, but this street is quite empty, I think." She went across the yard and up the steps to the house door. There was no near sound, no steam engine at work with beat and pant, no click of machinery or mingling and clashing of many sharp voices. But far away, the ominous gathering roar, deep clamoring.
Okay, before we get to the waterbed, did you not love the description of the game of words that she used to play? I had to go back and I had to listen to it a couple of times to get kind of the full picture. It was in that moment when Margaret was talking about being at the party, and she said she was kind of unhappy when Miss Thornton came, that's Fanny, came to take her to the other end of the room to go sit with the women, saying she was sure I should be uncomfortable at being the only lady among so many gentlemen. Which, first off, is wild. Margaret's just hanging out with the guys, listening to all the political talk and business talk, which is awesome. And then she said, I never thought about it. I was so busy listening, and the ladies were so dull. But I think it was clever, too. It reminded me of our old game of having each so many nouns to introduce in a sentence. And her father's like, what are you talking about? And she said, why, they took nouns that were signs of things, which gave evidence of wealth. Things like housekeepers, undergardeners, extent of glass, valuable lace, diamonds, and all those kinds of things. And each one formed her speech so as to bring them all in the prettiest accidental manner possible. So whatever her old game of having each so many nouns to introduce into a sentence, whatever that was and who she played it with, whether it was her father or her friends in London, it was the women on the women's side of the room who were each trying to bring words of wealth into their own speech while they were sitting around and talking to each other. It was like they were trying to put on airs and use the language of the world around them and make sure that they commented on everything as much as possible and how beautiful it all was. And again, we had another moment here where Margaret was like, it's a little too much, it's a little too bright, it's a little too many sweets, it's a little over. But everybody else, of course, is very happy to be there. And then we get to the waterbed. Did you just go, what? When you heard that? It's a thing. It actually is a thing. There were waterbeds back then. As far as I can understand, it must have been some kind of a tub, a bath, that contained water, probably warm to begin with, but it would become not so after a while. And they covered the bath with a canvas sheet that had been infused with rubber, so it was waterproof, because there was access at this time to rubber. So you have this waterproof rubber canvas top, and then they'd put kind of lightweight normal bedding on top of that, and then your sick person, who we can assume is having a hard time moving, could lie on this, and the softness and comfort of being on this kind of malleable surface helped to prevent bed sores. Or at least that was the theory put forward by a Scottish physician who evidently invented this but didn't patent it. So somebody else got the patent on it. But it was a thing. So Margaret goes and asks for a waterbed. Now, why Mrs. Thornton had a waterbed when she is absolutely not an invalid is beyond me. Does it just, I don't know. Did she just want to have it because it was the next new thing? I don't know. But it was a convenient thing for Margaret to need to go get. And an interesting one, too. I've learned more little tidbits about life in Victorian England from this book than I think I ever expected to. So, there you are. Next week, we get the next bit. Because something is coming. Margaret could hear it coming. And that's going to happen in our next chapter. The other thing that is happening is between now and when I record for the next chapter, I am going to check the video of North and South, and I'll let you know. I think after next week, after episode 345, it will be safe for you to watch the second episode of the North and South miniseries. If you have it on streaming on Netflix, or if you have the DVDs, it's broken into 4 parts, and I think you'll be able to watch part 2 safely without ruination raining down upon you after 345. So I'll let you know next week. So hold back for just a little bit or just a little longer. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. 345. Chapter 22.
Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion.
Episode 345, Comfortably Numb. Well, hello there. I almost feel like myself this week. Things are starting to become a new normal, which is lovely, but that also just means that I'm going to have to pick up and do this again in another 5.5 weeks. That's okay, though, because that time it will be moving someplace with furniture. And I am really excited about that after sleeping for 2 weeks on the floor. I do have pillows, but woof. And I think that might be part of why I am comfortably numb. Although, honestly, I actually think this started when we drove out from Tucson to Virginia. My left hand goes numb from time to time, and it turns out that it is because I carry tension in my neck, and I am pinching a nerve that is going through a scalene triangle, hello flatland, of muscle tissue on my neck. So there it is. It's like a flurry of doctors the last 4 months. I have no idea what's going on, but I'm getting answers to all this stuff that I didn't have answers to before. So physical therapy and lots of stretching and stuff like that, and working my core to relax my neck, I guess. I don't know, but working my core can't be a bad thing. So fine. But be that as it may, I need to get on with the podcast because it's getting late and Mommy is tired. But now, book. Last week, I forgot to announce something. Listener Lorna and I have been writing back and forth all this week, and she has shared such good and useful information. She shared a link with me called oldandinteresting.com, and the page she found is on stone scrubbing. Remember, way back, we were talking about Bessie's sister, rough stoning of the floor. And I think I was probably a little baffled by that. You know, it's weird because I had this image in my head and then I thought, oh, that can't possibly be right. But I think it's kind of like cleaning. You can see sometimes they have clean your toilet with a pumice stone if it's gotten really, really discolored from hard water and stuff like that. And I think it's the same thing. There was a whole industry of stones and grit and, different kinds of abrasives. And there was, of course, an importance in social standing that went along with how often your hearthstone or your front stoop or whatever were scrubbed down with other stones. You can imagine how much work this was. And the only parallel that I had in my head at the time was seeing old Western movies, or actually being out in the West, and you've got your big cast iron skillet and you've made dinner and you take it down to the stream and you wash it with sand. And it's the same idea, it's the same principle. It's an abrasive, and that's great. And then of course you dry that cast iron skillet off, because what do we not do? We don't want it to air dry and rust. Ask me how I know. So thanks to Lorna, I have linked to the stone scrubbing, the rough stoning website, and oldandinteresting.com. It's all one word. I could have spent days there reading stuff. I think you will be hooked as well. But Lorna also sent us some interesting personal information that she has to share with us. She said, I've lived in both the New Forest and Lancashire, although not Manchester, so I feel I have some insight into the contrasts that Margaret is experiencing. The New Forest is huge, and I'm betting they lived in it, not near it. Many people do, even now. There are villages inside the forest where it's perfectly normal to sit in a tea shop and watch wild ponies walk down the street. I know, right? Road trip. Want to move. Every garden has a gate or a cattle grid to keep the ponies out. In parts, it's open, but a lot of the forest is tall, ancient trees that enclose you in a cozy, comforting sort of way. Like a child sitting on the floor surrounded by adults, not so close that they will smother you, but close enough to protect you. The endless noise of their chatter is a comfort, even as it goes over your head. The landscape in the north is much more open, rolling hills and dry stone walls and big fields of sheep. Even outside the city, Margaret would feel exposed. And I thought that is a really important word, I think, to use. I thought Lorna put that beautifully, don't you? And Lorna went on to say that the accents are still doing what the accents were doing in our book. And she also mentioned it is not uncommon for someone to never have visited London, even now. It's a good 6-hour drive. I think I had been once before I moved south. Margaret's surprise at Fanny not having visited London says more about Margaret than it does about Fanny. And I think Lorna's right. Well, today is the episode you didn't know you were waiting for. This is the moment. It's wonderful. They did it really nicely in the miniseries if you decide to watch it next week. And it's a really fascinating piece of writing as well. I have listened to this chapter over and over and over again, mostly just because it's beautifully written, but it's also a lot happens, and some of it happens very, very quickly. And that's great. I mean, you wouldn't think that a novel like Elizabeth Gaskell, Charlotte Bronte's friend, you don't think, wow, action scene. But there's some action going down in today's chapter. Now, as you probably recall, last week, Margaret was told by the doctor that she needed to go and get a water mattress, a waterbed for her mother. And so she goes out into the streets and heads over to the Thorntons. Well, all of this churning has been going on in the background about the strike not going very well, and Boucher is upset, and now Margaret's upset, and everybody's getting upset and wound up. And that is the backdrop for today's chapter. So, last week it was all parties and fashion breaks, and oh my goodness, Mom is sick, really sick. We haven't really figured out what she has. I think I talked about this before, right? Are we all thinking probably cancer? I'm just not sure. Movie wasting disease does not fit. She's not tubercular. So I'm trying to figure out what is being done to her. Not sure. If you have a theory, please put it in the comments or over at Ravelry, or drop me an email and let me know, heather@craftlit.com, because I'm curious to see what our range of thoughts are on this. Is it going to be a little bit like a House episode where every single time somebody comes in, they run through the exact same litany of possibilities? So yeah, I'm curious. And the fact that they're needing the waterbed does indicate that she is pretty much immobilized right now, because the main reason to use a water mattress would have been to prevent bed sores from forming. So that's very sad for poor Mrs. Hale. And of course, poor Papa Hale. He's just not equipped at all. And poor Margaret, who just has to carry all the burdens because nobody else around her is capable. So today's chapter is what I'm going to play for you right now. Chapter 22 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 22. A Blow and Its Consequences. But work grew scarce, while bread grew dear, and wages lessened too. For Irish hordes were bidders here, our half-paid work to do. Corn Law Rhymes. Margaret was shown into the drawing-room. It had returned into its normal state of bag and covering. The windows were half open because of the heat, and the Venetian blinds covered the glass so that a grey, grim light reflected from the pavement below threw all the shadows wrong, and combined with the green-tinged upper light to make even Margaret's own face, as she caught it in the mirrors, look ghastly and wan. She sat and waited. No one came. Every now and then the wind seemed to bear the distant multitudinous sound nearer, and yet there was no wind. It died away into profound stillness between whiles. Fanny came in at last.
"Mamma will come directly, Miss Hale. She desired me to apologize to you as it is. Perhaps you know my brother has imported hands from Ireland, and it has irritated the Milton people excessively, as if he hadn't a right to get labour where he could, and the stupid wretches here wouldn't work for him, and now they've frightened these poor Irish starvelings so with their threats that we daren't let them out. You may see them huddled in that top room in the mill, and they are to sleep there to keep them safe from those brutes who will neither work nor let them work. And Mamma is seeing about their food, and John is speaking to them, for some of the women are crying to go back. Ah, here's Mamma."
Mrs. Thornton came in with a look of black sternness on her face, which made Margaret feel she had arrived at a bad time to trouble her with her request. However, it was only in compliance with Mrs. Thornton's expressed desire that she would ask for whatever they might want in the progress of her mother's illness. Mrs. Thornton's brow contracted and her mouth grew set, while Margaret spoke with gentle modesty of her mother's restlessness and Dr. Donaldson's wish that she should have the relief of a waterbed. She ceased. Mrs. Thornton did not reply immediately. Then she started up and exclaimed, "They're at the gates. Call John, Fanny. Call 'em in from the mill. They're at the gates. They'll batter 'em in. Call John, I say." And simultaneously the gathering tramp, to which she had been listening instead of heeding Margaret's words, was heard just right outside the wall, and an increasing din of angry voices raged behind the wooden barrier, which shook as if the unseen, maddened crowd made battering rams of their bodies and retreated a short space only to come with more united, steady impetus against it, till their great beats made the strong gates quiver like reeds before the wind. The women gathered round the windows, fascinated to look on the scene which terrified them. Mrs. Thornton, the women servants, Margaret, all were there. Fanny had returned screaming upstairs as if pursued at every step, and had thrown herself in hysterical sobbing on the sofa. Mrs. Thornton watched for her son, who was still in the mill. He came out, looked up at them, the pale cluster of faces, and smiled good courage to them before he locked the factory door. Then he called to one of the women to come down and undo his own door, which Fanny had fastened behind her in her mad flight. Mrs. Thornton herself went, and the sound of his well-known and commanding voice seemed to have been like the taste of blood to the infuriated multitude outside. Hitherto they had been voiceless, wordless, needing all their breath for their hard-laboring efforts to break down the gates. But now, hearing him speak inside, they set up such a fierce, unearthly groan that even Mrs. Thornton was white with fear as she preceded him into the room. He came in a little flushed, but his eyes gleaming as in answer to the trumpet call of danger, and with a proud look of defiance on his face that made him a noble, if not a handsome man. Margaret had always dreaded lest her courage should fail her in any emergency, and she should be proved to be what she dreaded lest she was, a coward. But now, in this real great time of reasonable fear and nearness of terror, she forgot herself and felt only an intense sympathy, intense to painfulness in the interests of the moment. Mr. Thornton came frankly forwards. "I'm sorry, Miss Hale, you have visited us at this unfortunate moment when I fear you may be involved in whatever risk we have to bear. Mother, hadn't you better go into the back rooms?
I'm not sure whether they may not have made their way from Pinner's Lane into the stable yard, but if not, you will be safer there than here. Go, Jane, continued he, addressing the upper servant. And she went, followed by the others. I stop here, said his mother. Where you are, there I stay. And indeed, retreat into the back rooms was of no avail. The crowd had surrounded the outbuildings at the rear and were sending forth their awful threatening roar behind. The servants retreated into the garrets with many a cry and shriek. Mr. Thornton smiled scornfully as he heard them. He glanced at Margaret, standing all by herself at the window nearest the factory. Her eyes glittered. Her colour was deepened on cheek and lip. As if she felt his look, she turned to him and asked a question that had been for some time in her mind.
"Where are the poor imported workpeople? In the factory there?"
Yes, I left them cowered up in a small room at the head of a back flight of stairs, bidding them run all risks and escape down there if they heard any attack made on the mill doors. But it is not them, it is me they want. When can the soldiers be here? Asked his mother in a low but not unsteady voice. He took out his watch with the same measured composure with which he did everything. He made some little calculation. Supposing Williams got straight off when I told him, and hadn't to dodge about amongst them, it must be 20 minutes yet. 20 minutes? Said his mother, for the first time showing her terror in the tones of her voice. Shut down the windows instantly, mother, exclaimed he. The gates won't bear such another shock. Shut down that window, Miss Hale. Margaret shut down her window and then went to assist Mrs. Thornton's trembling fingers. From some cause or other, there was a pause of several minutes in the unseen street. Mrs. Thornton looked with wild anxiety at her son's countenance, as if to gain the interpretation of the sudden stillness from him. His face was set into rigid lines of contemptuous defiance. Neither hope nor fear could be read there. Fanny raised herself up.
"Are they gone?"
asked she in a whisper. Gone, replied he. Listen. She did listen. They all could hear the one great straining breath, the creak of wood slowly yielding, the wrench of iron, the mighty fall of the ponderous gates. Fanny stood up, tottering, made a step or two towards her mother, and fell forwards into her arms in a fainting fit. Mrs. Thornton lifted her up with a strength that was as much that of the will as of the body, and carried her away. Thank God, said Mr. Thornton as he watched her out. Had you not better go upstairs, Miss Hale? Margaret's lips formed a no, but he could not hear her speak, for the tramp of innumerable steps right under the very wall of the house, and the fierce growl of low, deep, angry voices that had a ferocious murmur of satisfaction in them, more dreadful than their baffled cries not many minutes before. Never mind, said he, thinking to encourage her. I'm very sorry you should have been entrapped into all this alarm, but it cannot last long now. A few minutes more, and the soldiers will be here.
"Oh, God!" cried Margaret suddenly. "There is Boucher. I know his face, though he is livid with rage. He is fighting to get to the front. Look! Look!"
"Who is Boucher?" asked Mr. Thornton coolly, and coming close to the window to discover the man in whom Margaret took such an interest. As soon as they saw Mr. Thornton, they set up a yell. To call it not human is nothing. It was as the demonic desire of some terrible wild beast for the food that is withheld from his ravening. Even he drew back for a moment, dismayed at the intensity of hatred he had provoked. "Let them yell," said he. "In 5 minutes more. I only hope my poor Irishmen are not terrified out of their wits by such a fiend-like noise. Keep up your courage for 5 minutes, Miss Hale."
"Don't be afraid for me," she said hastily. "But what in 5 minutes? Can you do nothing to soothe these poor creatures? It is awful to see them."
The soldiers will be here directly, and that will bring 'em to reason."
"To reason?" said Margaret quickly. "What kind of reason?"
"The only reason that does with men that make themselves into wild beasts. By heaven, they've turned to the mill door."
"Mr. Thornton," said Margaret, shaking all over with her passion, "go down this instant if you are not a coward. Go down and face them like a man. Save these poor strangers whom you have decoyed here. Speak to your workmen as if they were human beings. Speak to them kindly. Don't let the soldiers come in and cut down poor creatures who are driven mad. I see one there who is. If you have any courage or noble quality in you, go out and speak to them man to man." He turned and looked at her while she spoke. A dark cloud came over his face while he listened. He set his teeth as he heard her words.
"I will go. Perhaps I may ask you to accompany me downstairs and bar the door behind me. My mother and sister will need that protection."
"Oh, Mr. Thornton, I do not know. I may be wrong, only—" But he was gone. He was downstairs in the hall. He had unbarred the front door. All she could do was to follow him quickly and fasten it behind him and clamber up the stairs again with a sick heart and a dizzy head. Again she took her place by the farthest window. He was on the steps below. She saw that by the direction of 1,000 angry eyes, but she could neither see nor hear anything save the savage satisfaction of the rolling angry murmur. She threw the window wide open. Many in the crowd were mere boys, cruel and thoughtless. Cruel because they were thoughtless. Some were men, gaunt as wolves and mad for prey. She knew how it was. They were like Boucher, with starving children at home, relying on ultimate success in their efforts to get higher wages, and enraged beyond measure at discovering that Irishmen were to be brought in to rob their little ones of bread. Margaret knew it all. She read it in Boucher's face, forlornly desperate and livid with rage. If Mr. Thornton would but say something to them, let them hear his voice only, it seemed as if it would be better than this wild beating and raging against the stony silence that vouchsafed them no word, even of anger or reproach. But perhaps he was speaking now. There was a momentary hush of their noise, inarticulate as that of a troop of animals. She tore her bonnet off and bent forwards to hear. She could only see, for if Mr. Thornton had indeed made the attempt to speak, the momentary instinct to listen to him was past and gone, and the people were raging worse than ever. He stood with his arms folded, still as a statue, his face pale with repressed excitement. They were trying to intimidate him, to make him flinch. Each was urging the other on to some immediate act of personal violence. Margaret felt intuitively that in an instant all would be uproar. The first touch would cause an explosion in which, among such hundreds of infuriated men and reckless boys, even Mr. Thornton's life would be unsafe. That in another instant the stormy passions would have passed their bounds and swept away all barriers of reason or apprehension of consequence. Even while she looked, she saw lads in the background stooping to take off their heavy wooden clogs, the readiest missile they could find. She saw it was the spark to the gunpowder, and, with a cry which no one heard, she rushed out of the room, downstairs. She had lifted the great iron bar of the door with an imperious force, had thrown the door wide open, and was there, in face of that angry sea of men, her eyes smiting them with flaming arrows of reproach. The clogs were arrested in the hands that held them. The countenances, so fell not a moment before, now looked irresolute, and as if asking what this meant. For she stood between them and their enemy. She could not speak, but held out her arms towards them till she could recover breath. "Oh, do not use violence. He is one man, and you are many."
But her words died away, for there was no tone in her voice. It was but a hoarse whisper.
Mr. Thornton stood a little on one side. He had moved away from behind her, as if jealous of anything that should come between him and danger.
"Go,"
said she once more, and now her voice was like a cry.
"The soldiers are sent for, are coming. Go peaceably. Go away. You shall have relief from your complaints, whatever they are."
"Shall them Irish blackguards be packed back again?" asked one from out the crowd, with fierce threatening in his voice. "Never for your bidding," exclaimed Mr. Thornton, and instantly the storm broke. The hootings rose and filled the air, but Margaret did not hear them. Her eye was on the group of lads who had armed themselves with their clogs some time before. She saw their gesture, she knew its meaning, she read their aim. Another moment and Mr. Thornton might be smitten down, he whom she had urged and goaded to come to this perilous place. She only thought how she could save him. She threw her arms around him. She made her body into a shield from the fierce people beyond. Still, with his arms folded, he shook her off. "Go away," said he in his deep voice. "This is no place for you."
"It is," said she. "You did not see what I saw."
If she thought her sex would be a protection, if, with shrinking eyes, she had turned away from the terrible anger of these men in any hope that ere she looked again they would have paused and reflected and slunk away and vanished, she was wrong. Their reckless passion had carried them too far to stop, at least had carried some of them too far. For it is always the savage lads with their love of cruel excitement who head the riot, reckless to what bloodshed it may lead. A clog whizzed through the air. Margaret's fascinated eyes watched its progress. It missed its aim, and she turned, sick with affright, but changed not her position, only hid her face on Mr. Thornton's arm. Then she turned and spoke again.
"For God's sake, do not damage your cause by this violence. You do not know what you are doing."
She strove to make her words distinct. A sharp pebble flew by her, grazing forehead and cheek and drawing a blinding sheet of light before her eyes. She lay like one dead on Mr. Thornton's shoulder. Then he unfolded his arms and held her encircled in one for an instant. "You do well," said he. "You come to oust the innocent stranger. You fall, you hundreds, on one man, and when a woman comes before you, to ask you for your own sakes to be reasonable creatures, your cowardly wrath folds upon her. You do well." They were silent while he spoke. They were watching, open-eyed and open-mouthed, the thread of dark red blood which wakened them up from their trance of passion. Those nearest the gate stole out ashamed. There was a movement through all the crowd, a retreating movement. Only one voice cried out,
"The stone were meant for thee, but thou wert sheltered behind a woman."
Mr. Thornton quivered with rage. The blood flowing had made Margaret conscious, dimly, vaguely conscious. He placed her gently on the doorstep, her head leaning against the frame. "Can you rest there?" he asked. But without waiting for her answer, he went slowly down the steps right into the middle of the crowd. "Now kill me if it is your brutal will. There is no woman to shield me here. You may beat me to death. You will never move me from what I have determined upon. Not you." He stood amongst them, with his arms folded, in precisely the same attitude as he had been in on the steps. But the retrograde movement towards the gate had begun as unreasoningly, perhaps as blindly, as the simultaneous anger, or perhaps the idea of the approach of the soldiers and the sight of that pale, upturned face with closed eyes, still and sad as marble, though the tears welled out of the long entanglement of eyelashes and dropped down, and heavier, slower plash than even tears came the drip of blood from her wound. Even the most desperate, Boucher himself, drew back, faltered away, scowled, and finally went off, muttering curses on the master, who stood in his unchanging attitude looking after their retreat with defiant eyes.
The moment that retreat had changed into a flight, as it was sure from its very character to do, he darted up the steps to Margaret. She tried to rise without his help.
"It is nothing," she said with a sickly smile. "The skin is grazed, and I was stunned at the moment. Oh, I am so thankful they are gone."
And she cried without restraint. He could not sympathize with her. His anger had not abated. It was rather rising the more as his sense of immediate danger was passing away. The distant clank of the soldiers was heard just 5 minutes too late to make this vanished mob feel the power of authority and order. He hoped they would see the troops and be quelled by the thought of their narrow escape. While these thoughts crossed his mind, Margaret clung to the doorpost to steady herself. But a film came over her eyes. He was only just in time to catch her.
"Mother, mother," cried he, "come down. They are gone, and Miss Hale is hurt."
He bore her into the dining room and laid her on the sofa there, laid her down softly, and looking on her pure white face, the sense of what she was to him came upon him so keenly that he spoke it out in his pain.
"Oh, my Margaret, no one can tell what you are to me. Dead, cold as you lie there, you are the only woman I ever loved. Oh, Margaret, Margaret!"
Inarticulately as he spoke, kneeling by her and rather moaning than saying the words, he started up, ashamed of himself, as his mother came in. She saw nothing but her son a little paler, a little sterner than usual.
"Miss Hale is hurt, mother. A stone has grazed her temple. She has lost a good deal of blood, I'm afraid."
"She looks very seriously hurt. I could almost fancy her dead," said Mrs. Thornton, a good deal alarmed.
"It is only a fainting fit. She has spoken to me since."
But all the blood in his body seemed to rush inwards to his heart as he spoke, and he absolutely trembled.
"Go and call Jane. She can find me the things I want, and do you go to your Irish people, who are crying and shouting as if they were mad with fright."
He went away as if weights were tied to every limb that bore him from her. He called Jane. He called his sister. She should have all womanly care, all gentle tendance. But every pulse beat in him as he remembered how she had come down and placed herself in foremost danger. Could it be to save him? At the time, he had pushed her aside and spoken gruffly. He had seen nothing but the unnecessary danger she had placed herself in. He went to his Irish people, with every nerve in his body thrilling at the thought of her, and found it difficult to understand enough of what they were saying to soothe and comfort away their fears. There, they declared, they would not stop. They claimed to be sent back. And so he had to think and talk and reason. Mrs. Thornton bathed Margaret's temples with eau de cologne. As the spirit touched the wound, which till then neither Mrs. Thornton nor Jane had perceived, Margaret opened her eyes, but it was evident she did not know where she was nor who they were. The dark circles deepened, the lips quivered and contracted, and she became insensible once more.
"She's had a terrible blow," said Mrs. Thornton. "Is there any one who will go for a doctor?"
"Not me, ma'am, if you please," said Jane, shrinking back. "Them rabble may be all about. I don't think the cut is so deep, ma'am, as it looks."
"I will not run the chance. She was hurt in our house. If you are a coward, Jane, I am not. I will go."
"Pray, ma'am, let me send one of the police. There's ever so many come up, and soldiers too."
"And yet you're afraid to go. I will not have their time taken up with our errands. They'll have enough to do to catch some of the mob." "You'll not be afraid to stop in this house?" she asked contemptuously, "and go on bathing Miss Hale's forehead, shall you? I shall not be 10 minutes away."
"Couldn't Hannah go, ma'am?"
"Why, Hannah? Why, any but you? No, Jane. If you don't go, I do."
Mrs. Thornton went first to the room in which she had left Fanny stretched on the bed. She started up as her mother entered.
"Oh, mamma, How you terrified me. I thought you were a man that had got into the house.
Nonsense. The men are all gone away. There are soldiers all round the place seeking for their work now it is too late. Miss Hale is lying on the dining-room sofa badly hurt. I'm going for the doctor.
Oh, don't, Mamma. They'll murder you.
She clung to her mother's gown. Mrs. Thornton wrenched it away with no gentle hand.
Find me someone else to go, but that girl must not bleed to death.
Bleed? Oh, how horrid. How has she got hurt?
I don't know. I have no time to ask. Go down to her, Fanny, and do try to make yourself of use. Jane is with her, and I trust it looks worse than it is. Jane has refused to leave the house, cowardly woman, and I won't put myself in the way of any more refusals from my servants, so I am going myself.
Oh, dear, dear,
said Fanny, crying and preparing to go down rather than be left alone with the thought of wounds and bloodshed in the very house.
Oh, Jane,
said she, creeping into the dining-room.
What is the matter? How white she looks. How did she get hurt? Did they throw stones into the drawing-room?
Margaret did indeed look white and wan, although her senses were beginning to return to her. But the sickly days of the swoon made her still miserably faint. She was conscious of movement around her, and of refreshment from the eau de cologne, and a craving for the bathing to go on without intermission. But when they stopped to talk, she could no more have opened her eyes or spoken to ask for more bathing than the people who lie in death-like trance can move or utter sound to arrest the awful preparations for their burial while they are yet fully aware, not merely of the actions of those around them, but of the idea that is the motive for such actions. Jane paused in her bathing to reply to Miss Thornton's question.
She'd have been safe enough, miss, if she'd stayed in the drawing-room or come up to us. We were in the front garret and could see it all out of harm's way.
Where was she then? Said Fanny, drawing nearer by slow degrees as she became accustomed to the sight of Margaret's pale face.
Just before the front door with Master,
said Jane significantly.
With John? With my brother? How did she get there? Nay, miss, that's not for me to say,
answered Jane with a slight toss of her head.
Sarah did.
Sarah what? Said Fanny with impatient curiosity. Jane resumed her bathing, as if what Sarah did or said was not exactly the thing she liked to repeat.
Sarah what?
asked Fanny sharply.
Don't speak in these half sentences, or I can't understand you. Well, miss, since you will have it, Sarah, you see, was in the best place for seeing, being at the right-hand window, and she says, and said at the very time, too, that she saw Miss Hale with her arms about Master's neck, hugging him before all the people. I don't believe it, said Fanny. I know she cares for my brother, anyone can see that, and I dare say she'd give her eyes if he'd marry her, which she never will, I can tell her, but I don't believe she'd be so bold and forward as to put her arms round his neck. Poor young lady, she's paid for it dearly if she did. It's my belief that the blow has given her such an ascendancy of blood to the head as she'll never get the better from. She looks like a corpse now. Oh, I wish Mamma would come, said Fanny, wringing her hands. I never was in the room with a dead person before. Stay, miss, she's not dead. Her eyelids are quivering, and here's wet tears are coming down her cheeks. Speak to her, Miss Fanny. Are you better now? asked Fanny in a quavering voice.
No answer, no sign of recognition, but a faint pink colour returned to her lips, although the rest of her face was ashen pale. Mrs. Thornton came hurriedly in with the nearest surgeon she could find.
How is she? Are you better, my dear?
As Margaret opened her filmy eyes and gazed dreamily at her.
Here is Mr. Lowe, come to see you.
Mrs. Thornton spoke loudly and distinctly as to a deaf person. Margaret tried to rise and drew her ruffled, luxuriant hair instinctively over the cut.
I am better now,
said she in a very low, faint voice.
I was a little sick." She let him take her hand and feel her pulse. The bright color came for a moment into her face when he asked to examine the wound in her forehead, and she glanced up at Jane as if shrinking from her inspection more than from the doctor's. "It is not much, I think. I am better now. I must go home."
"Not until I have applied some strips of plaster, and you have rested a little."
She sat down hastily without another word and allowed it to be bound up. "Now, if you please," said she, "I must go. Mamma will not see it, I think. It is under the hair, is it not?"
"Quite. No one could tell."
"But you must not go," said Mrs. Thornton impatiently. "You are not fit to go." "I must," said Margaret decidedly. "Think of Mamma, if they should hear. Besides, I must go," said she vehemently. "I cannot stay here. May I ask for a cab?"
"You are quite flushed and feverish,"
observed Mr. Lowe. "It is only with being here, when I do so want to go. The air, getting away, would do me more good than anything," pleaded she.
"I really believe it is as she says,"
Mr. Lowe replied.
"If a mother is so ill as you told me on the way here, it may be very serious if she hears of this riot and does not see her daughter back at the time she expects. The injury is not deep. I will fetch a cab if your servants are still afraid to go out."
"Oh, thank you," said Margaret. "It will do me more good than anything. It is the air of this room that makes me feel so miserable." She leant back on the sofa and closed her eyes. Fanny beckoned her mother out of the room and told her something that made her equally anxious with Margaret for the departure of the latter. Not that she fully believed Fanny's statement, but she credited enough to make her manner to Margaret appear very much constrained at wishing her good-bye. Mr. Lowe returned in the cab.
"If you will allow me, I will see you home, Miss Hale. The streets are not very quiet yet."
Margaret's thoughts were quite alive enough to the present to make her desirous of getting rid of both Mr. Lowe and the cab before she reached Crampton Crescent, for fear of alarming her father and mother. Beyond that one aim she would not look. That ugly dream of insolent words spoken about herself could never be forgotten, but could be put aside till she was stronger, for, oh, she was very weak, and her mind sought for some present fact to steady itself upon and keep it from utterly losing consciousness in another hideous, sickly swoon.
The ugly dream of insolent words? Which words is she insolenting about? This is one of the reasons why I went back and listened to the chapter a couple times. Did she hear Thornton saying that he loved her? Did she catch the tone from Fanny? No idea. Did she hear the servant? We don't know, which is awesome because, first off, ambiguity is always fun in books. But second off, we could see Margaret taking offense at almost anything that got said around her while she was passed out. And I think you'd be able to sell it. I think there would be good reasons for any of it. But oh my gosh, Margaret, right? Going down in front of the crowd. Now, some of that seems to have been propelled, at least in some part, by guilt, because she kind of shoved Thornton out the door to his doom and thought better of it and tried to take it back. And that's human and understandable. But I think this is the moment where modern critics, it's one of a couple of moments where modern critics look at this book and say, wow, where did she come from? Where did Elizabeth Gaskell come from to write that scene with that woman? This little, kind of oddly pretty, raised in London to be a lady woman. She's just busting out all over. She is in control. And that's amazing and fantastic and shocking. She threw her arms around him. and got whacked in the head for it, sure. But really, and I thought it was such a strange word saying that a sharp pebble went by, because she got clocked. It knocked her out, and then she started bleeding, and then that kept her fainting. But wow, that's amazing. I think someone, not me, I'm a little busy, but someone needs to write a scene, a short story, a novel where where Margaret Hale and Marion Holcomb from The Woman in White get together and solve crimes or something. I don't know. Take the world by storm. Because those two women in petticoats and capes, they could do some serious damage. I love her. And now that we've passed the scene, I can go back and re-listen to all of my audio with Larry and re-edit some stuff together that we just couldn't play before because we would have given this away. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to spoil that for you. So next week, I think we can expect to see the fallout from all of this. And so on that note, I will leave you. Have a great week. I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.
You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at craftlit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/craftlit to craftlit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at craftlit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.